Welcome to the Tenant Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson here with my good friend and partner, co-host extraordinaire, Wes Brown.
Todd, how you doing, buddy?
Good, man.
Oh my God, the drive down to Steamboat was amazing.
We are here in the beautiful town of Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and we're really excited about our guest this week, who is artist and master printmaker Sue Oehme, owner of Oehme Graphics. They're a fine print publisher that works with internationally recognized artists in her state-of-the-art printmaking facility here in Steamboat.
Hello.
Sue, how are you?
Great. How are you?
So happy to have you here today.
Nice to be here in my living room.
Yeah, actually, you've been hosting us.
Yes. Oh, and I'll tell you, this space is just amazing. And Sue was so gracious to let us stay in the apartment above her studio. It's just a lovely space. And we had just such a good time, just relaxing. And so thank you so much. We appreciate that.
And it was nice to see you out at Art Walk last night.
Yeah.
Nice.
We got a first Friday in Steamboat. So that was nice.
Great.
Got to see some good art.
Yeah. It was nice to see, be outside of our usual realm of people and galleries that we go visit to see something completely different. So that was nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we get started, to our listeners, if you want to check out Sue's work, you need to go to sueoehme.com. This is her artist website. It's SUEOEHME.com. And if you want to, as an artist, if you're interested in printmaking, go to her business website that talks about the studio, which is oehmegraphics.com. Again, last name OEHME, and check it out. It has all kinds of great information if you're curious about printmaking. Let's start off today by talking about your work as an artist. We were introduced to your work last spring at Space Gallery, which is just a wonderful gallery there in Denver. And that was such an exquisite show.
Thank you.
It was really wonderful. Tell our listeners about your work and kind of like what you do personally, because you do a multitude of things. It's not just printmaking. You're incorporating a lot of different elements and things into it.
Right. Well, this could be the whole thing right here. This one question. First of all, I have to give a shout out to Michael Burnett, who's the owner and director and extraordinary person from Space Gallery. He is a gem, and he really encourages and advances his artists and allows them to do what they need to do, which is what he did for us in this show. It was the 20th anniversary show I was with Pat Aaron and Jeff Glode Wise, who's a sculptor. Pat's an encaustic painter. And the three of us together, it was just magical the way it came together, the color palettes, the way the linear elements in Jeff's sculptures worked with some things in mine, and the colors of Pat's. And it was just a phenomenal show. So in that show, I did 3 installation pieces, which is a new direction for me that's kind of coming off of the prints that I've done for the last about 6 or 7 years now. And the prints are, or have been, they're changing a little bit now, but they have been kind of a compilation of many, many different disparate elements that are basically flat. They're almost all flat or sort of flat. And they're inked or rolled with different colored inks and then kind of assembled like a sort of like a crazy jigsaw puzzle on the printing press. I have a big etching press downstairs, and they are printed in multiple layers so that these elements that are created from solid plates start to become, they feel like they're transparent or translucent on the paper because they're overlapping each other. Then you get these, just crazy kind of structural abstractions out of all these different elements. And by elements, I mean leftover plates from other projects that I've done with artists. They all give the go-ahead for this, first of all. And it's really fun to see some of them come to a show and find one of their tiny little elements in this crazy network of images that's all over the paper. But I also use everything you can imagine, from onion bags. I cut up onion bags and use the netting on pieces. I use the little tags that are on bread packages to hold the bread, shut. And all kinds of things like that, twist ties and lots of little scraps of things that my artists are very often cutting out stencil pieces out of vellum or acetate or something to use in their prints. And the negative shapes, I love the negative shapes. And there's some fascination I have with that I've just saved a lot of those things. Sometimes they're very geometric or very recognizable, and oftentimes they're not. They're just crazy, weird, curvilinear shapes. So I use all of that stuff in my work, and I think it sort of draws in from just not wanting to ever waste anything. And I hate throwing stuff away. I just hate it. And I'm very aware of all of that kind of those issues, those environmental issues with what's happening with our planet, and trying to not even just recycle, but actually reuse a lot and reduce a lot. But being able to reuse these elements for my art is phenomenal. So then, after printing many, many of these pieces for a long time, I also use post-consumer packaging material, which is essentially like a toothpaste box that you unfold, and it's cut and shaped in such a way that when it is put together in the factory, it holds a tube of toothpaste. And I just love that. I love the concept that someone who has a design degree had to figure out exactly the shape of that and the curves of the little flaps and everything. And you can just imagine every possible kind of post-consumer packaging. So those started to become more significant in the prints. And as they got printed over and over and over, these pieces of cardboard, essentially, then they developed these patinas, these beautiful, beautiful colored patinas with oranges peeking out from under blues and just gorgeous things. And there was a point where I realized I didn't want to print one of them anymore because it was so beautiful. I just couldn't put any more color on it. I had to save it. So that was the first moment that became this huge installation that I had at the show at Space. And that was titled All Our Lost Souls. It became a very personal piece to me, and it was related very directly in my mind to the coronavirus and the pandemic. And each of these elements, I call them, the pieces of cardboard with these beautiful colors on them, they were very individual, and yet together as a group, they became something bigger than what they were separately. And it slowly started to gel in my head how I wanted to put them on the wall. And they ended up being in this configuration that I was trying to slightly mimic the graph of the COVID spikes as we all watched it day after day on television, stuck in our houses, and like, where's it going now? Is it going up? Is it going down? And ironically, or something, coincidentally or something, it ended up looking very much like a mountain, and I live in the mountains, and there's many, many other ways you can look at it. And it became a very personal piece to me to honor all those people. So that's the long answer.
No, I love it. And what I love about that piece is that it's post-consumer goods that you're developing that you use for another purpose.
Yeah.
And then you take those and create another beautiful piece of art.
Right.
And it's just that, constant idea of reusability of material that we would normally just throw away. I mean, I throw toothpaste boxes away all the time, right?
Yeah.
And not even give it a second thought. But the fact that you sat down and through the process have come to the realization that you could make something even beautiful from those elements.
Right.
And when I saw that piece at Space Gallery and it's on the wall and it's a pretty significant size, it just blew me away. Yeah. And then to see the other elements of the vellum piece that you have also hanging before you got into that, and then the individual prints upstairs of your work, I was just like blown away.
Wow.
It was just because of that, multi-layer element of, what I can do with art and what leftover pieces from my creation. Right.
Right.
I love
just
that.
keep reusing them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now all those pieces that are in that installation are essentially, we call it retiring them. They're retired. They're out to pasture, and it'll be installed again somewhere. I'm hoping at the Arvada Center. But yeah, when you reference the vellum piece, so that's hanging behind me in the gallery, and that is all the same elements, all those same pieces of cardboard that are all like weird geometric-ish shapes. And they were printed on vellum and then dried for months, because oil ink on vellum just does not want to dry ever. But they're also impervious to anything. They're very, very stable now because the ink is archival and the vellum is not going to do anything at all. And so I knew at some point, I remember there was a moment when we were printing them on these huge sheets of vellum that I'd gotten for free from an architectural firm, because we use a lot of vellum here. But they were gigantic. So it was really hard for a lot of my artists to use these. So we started printing these pieces on the vellum, and we just had them pinned on the wall to dry. But then once they were dry, at some point I put like 3 or 4 of them layered on top of each other in front of the window. And it was so beautiful. It was like stained glass or something. And the secondary and tertiary colors that would come out of it, of the yellow and the green and the orange merging together or something, just really, really beautiful moments. So I knew at that point I wanted to do something with all of those pieces that was in front of light. So at Space, I installed it in front of the great big huge glass window. And it was amazing to watch it over the course of the day, because that window faces west. So by the end of the evening, there would be these shafts of sunlight like streaming through these long vertical colored translucent strands of materials that I was trying to evoke seaweed forests, like in the documentary My Octopus Teacher. I just saw that during COVID. It was one of my goals to watch that. And it was just such a fabulous, amazing documentary. And to see him swimming through that seaweed forest or kelp forest was so beautiful. So I was trying to kind of evoke the same thing with that piece.
Yeah. I love it.
Thank you.
I'm just, like I said, I was just blown away when I walked in it, because it's one thing to go see something that's a beautiful piece of work, and then you see the layer upon layer that you did consciously, like how to make this another piece based off of something you'd already done. I love it. So
thank you.
And I love that exploration of like the thought process that an artist, like this path that they kind of follow and how it kind of happens organically and what leads them into it. I'm appalled by all the stuff that gets thrown away. Like, all the consumer waste. I constantly think about it. And that's what really resonated with me in the work, is that I recycle, but I'm constantly like, God, why do we have packaging like this? Like,
right.
Why can't we get away? Why isn't there a better solution? I'm sure there's somebody that's working on it out there.
Yeah, I hope.
But it disturbs me. Yeah. And I love the fact that you're taking these objects and making art out of them, and also making a statement about, our consumerism and what we do as a society, as a culture. And, and we're in the depths of it right now as far as how it's affecting us on this planet. I mean, we're in Steamboat, and today it looks like it could be overcast and foggy, but it's actually smoke from all the forest fires. And, the whole West is burning and in drought, and it's a crazy time. So I'm glad that you're making, even a subtle statement with your art.
Yeah.
What was the actual moment or catalyst for you that decided you were going to start collecting all that? Because obviously you've been collecting stuff for a while. So do you remember that moment where it kind of hit you like, I should start doing something with this?
No. And it really was a very gradual thing. I guess, I've always sort of been a collector of things. I have a salt and pepper shaker collection. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I dated a person who was into collecting like ceramics and going to tag sales and then reselling things at the flea market in New York City. So from that, I started collecting certain things. I have a collection of purses, really, really awesome purses and aprons and stuff like that. So, but all of this material, I think it was just, I knew there was something that I was going to do with it, but I didn't know what yet. Literally in I can't even think now, maybe 2003 or something. That's almost 20 years ago. That's 18 years ago. I worked somewhere around there. I worked with Arlene Sheckett at the print studio I ran before Oehme Graphics, which is called River House Editions, or was called River House Editions. So Arlene Sheckett had done a whole series of these beautiful sculptural pieces, 3-dimensional pieces that were these sort of Buddhist inspired vases, but they were completely her own design, that they were just these really gorgeous, perfect curves and shapes and everything. So we translated that concept into her printmaking project by cutting out pieces of this material called Comatex, which is sort of like foam core and plexiglass have a baby, and it's Comatex. So it's kind of hard foam core. And anyway, so we cut this stuff out, and I saved all of that negative material that was cut away by this fabulous intern. That's all she did the whole time, was cut hundreds of these shapes. And I still have those. And in fact, those were the elements that were in the very first prints I did, especially this one called Mood Ring, that were inked. They became this sort of linking system throughout all of this perpendicular and parallel mark making or imagery. But they're very curvilinear, and they're very random, and they were inked in silver ink. So it kind of became this completely different element in those pieces. Anyway, I got off track there, but I still am collecting many, many, many things. So now I have a whole collection of these little caps. One of my friends is a former anesthesiologist in Denver, and he and his wife, who's a great friend, they have saved all these lids from the vials of the medicines that he opens in OR, and they're yellow and pink and blue and red and green, and they're just gorgeous. They're beautiful. They're like little buttons or little tiddlywinks. That's what they look like. And they just throw them away. They're used one time, and they have to be thrown away. So he's been saving them for me. I now have a giant jar of them, and I have a huge jar of old buttons and a bunch of other things. So my next venue or things that I'm working toward are going to be more specifically just these individual different types of collections isolated, and then somehow put back together in a different form, so that they have to have some kind of element of beauty that when you first walk in and see the show, it has to just hit you that, oh my God, that's really beautiful. But then I love it when you kind of go deeper into it, and there's this other meaning and this other, like, oh my God, where did all those things come from? So.
And I did the same thing when I was looking at All the Lost Souls. Mm-hmm. You see the piece, significant size, you're looking from afar, and then when you walk up, you're like, oh my God, that's a toothbrush. I recognize this box.
Yeah.
And then it just totally changes your view on stuff.
Right.
And then you're trying to find out all the other little things that you recognize and trying to figure out something that you don't, what it is.
Right. And that was very intentional too, that I saved certain elements, didn't get completely covered with ink. So it also becomes somewhat autobiographical. Like there's a little card from Southampton in England, which is, my husband and I are huge Southampton Saints fans. Yay, go Saints, go Red. For whatever reason, it's actually one of our good artist friends who loves them and is from there. But so there's just little tiny things here and there that people can find. There's like a swimsuit model, but she's upside down on the wall. And then there's, things like that you kind of like Where's Waldo or I Spy.
Right.
I Spy books. My son and I loved I Spy books when he was little. So I think a lot of it comes from that too.
Yeah.
There's that kind of crazy overall hypnotic element to it of like finding things, like just picking little things out,
Yeah, it's like Wes said, it's pretty fun to, as you stand there and spend time with it, you start picking out those little elements, and it's like, oh, and then you're engrossed. Like, 10 minutes later, you're like, oh, wow, I've been standing here for like 10 minutes and I love this piece.
Yeah.
When did this love affair with art begin for you? When did this journey start?
I've always wanted to be an artist, and I had a couple of divergent tangents when, like in high school, I wanted to be a vet, and then I very sadly saw a cat get hit by a car, and that was the end of that because there's no way I could have helped that cat as much as I wanted to. And I also almost majored in music, and I played piano all my life, but I was just not really ever that great. I thought I was great. Like I envisioned myself as, what's her name in A Room with a View, Helena Bonham Carter. And she's just this amazing romantic pianist, and she's like hammering out Beethoven on the piano, and she's filled with love and fear and everything. And anyway, so I was just never that good, but I came really close. It's funny. I came really close to majoring in music. So, art, I've always drawn. My mother used to love to tell this story that when I was 5, for some reason, I don't know why, I drew little pictures of faces and all of these little heads. They were floating, and they had lit candles drawn on the top of their heads. So I guess, I don't know, enlightenment. I mean, who knows? Maybe I was a Renaissance child, who knows? But then I started drawing horses, and that's kind of like how I taught myself to draw, starting with little stick horses and getting all the way by high school into, they look like photographs. And a lot of people are kind of stunned by that because I'm not a realistic artist any longer. And in fact, at home, I have a couple of things I gave to my husband. He's fully behind me on all of it. But I learned how to draw dogs, when I was 10, and my parents had these dog portraits in the living room that I did. And then there's this other thing I gave to him. It's a stick. It's like just this stupid, ugly little stick. But the assignment was to just render this little stick as well as you could. And so it's quite lovely. I have to say, it's beautiful pencil drawing, all kinds of shading and cracks and little wisps coming off of it. And then we actually mounted whatever the object was that we were, told to draw. We mounted it right above it. So it's in this like cool shadow box, and it looks really cool. The drawing looks better than the stick, I think. So, anyway, so yeah, I've always been doing art. I've loved it. As I started to get into being a master printer, that was kind of all consuming for many years. And I moved out to Colorado to run River House Editions in 1996 near the end of 96. And I would say for at least 9 of those first years, I really didn't do a whole lot. I met my husband, got married, had a baby, ran this big print studio, was traveling all over the country and internationally. So I just didn't have time for it. So my own art career has definitely gone up and down, but for the last 5 or 6 years now, it's been very much on the upswing. And as again, Michael Burnett has been just such an incredible mentor to help me, just keep going and getting bigger and thinking more deeply about everything.
Yeah, we had a great conversation with him on one of our episodes, and it was just fun to talk to him. Mm-hmm. Very thoughtful and really good at what he does. He's a great gallerist. He's very thoughtful on how he's going to lay things out, and it was really evident with the show that you were a part of. And but did you go to school for printmaking, or did you just kind of learn like on the job training, kind of, so to speak?
No, I went to school. I did both, actually. I'd say I went to University of Michigan, go Blue, and got to give those little shout outs there, right? And I studied printmaking and painting, and I always think of myself as like the original multitasker. It's like my personality is such that I'm kind of constantly got about 5 different things happening at the same time. And so printmaking is a very, very process-driven art form. There's lots of downtime when you're waiting for a plate to etch, or you're waiting for a litho plate to process, or whatever it is. And painting, on the other hand, is kind of like you're all in all the time. You're just sitting there looking at a painting. You're ripping your hair out. You don't know what to do, or you love 3/4 of it, and that upper left corner just sucks. And it's like, you don't know what to do about that either. So, for me, it was a perfect combination of these two things, because I could like step away from the painting and walk down the hall to my printmaking studio in school and do something, throw a plate in or put a ground on a plate or something. And then very often it would help me just kind of clear my head for the painting. And then I would go back down and sometimes, certainly not always, that's for sure, but sometimes I would be able to work on the painting a little bit more effectively. So I feel like that concept has really carried on all through my life. And now, I kind of have little spurts of time when I get to do my own work. With COVID, it changed a lot because, well, that's a whole nother story, but I had a lot more time because everything got shut down, obviously. But I feel like I'm much more productive now, and I'm really, really efficient. Like I kind of am able to have everything planned out for something, a print. I'm talking prints now. And I come in and I ink all the plates and I do the thing. And usually it's fairly successful right away. I often, though, hand paint things afterwards and kind of embellish them or shift, space or something like that with drawing and watercolor.
You kind of showed us a few pieces yesterday where you've gone in and painted, or I think you even said colored pencil.
Yeah.
You used some colored pencil in some of some of the spaces on some of the pieces downstairs. Yeah,
I kind of just fill in little bits of negative space here and there. It's usually just feeling like something is lacking a little bit of pizzazz or, a little color, or a balance, kind of compositional balance with the color. So there's a lot of very formal elements in the work, that's the beginning of it almost. That's like where I'm really starting it all. And then for me, a lot of the conceptual parts of it come after or nearing the end of it, where I start to really think more about what I'm trying to say with it and especially the big installation pieces.
Yeah, I want to ask about process a little bit. There's multiple types of printmaking, right?
Yes.
You got etches, and then you got wood block printing. That's a form of printmaking, right? So can you talk about that? And not a big history lesson on it, but like what it is, and for the layman that has no idea what printmaking is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there will be a test later.
Yes. It'll be online. We will grade you.
So really quickly, there are basically 5 now main types of printmaking. The oldest was relief, which is woodblock that morphed into linoleum, any kind of any material where an artist is sort of carving into a surface and making it very deep. And then usually the image is actually inked on the top. The top layer is relief. From that kind of evolved etching, or intaglio methods, that's with a G. And those are essentially incised into the plate, into typically a metal plate with some either tool or material like acid or a mordant. That's what I do. That's my focus, although I've been trained also with silkscreen and litho. Lithography is a very chemical process, and it actually that developed directly from an accident in an etching studio where someone had a stone essentially as a kind of like just a working table, and they had done some drawing with like a greasy pencil for their etching, and I should know who this was, but I don't. And they spilled some acid or something on it, and it caused a reaction where the grease repelled the acid. And that's essentially, it's oil versus water is litho, essentially. And then past that was silkscreen. And silkscreen is where the image is usually photographically shot onto a super tight screen. And it's the only method where it is not a mirror image. So the image actually goes through the screen onto the paper. So it's the same as you see on the screen, whereas all the other ones, the paper goes down on a surface and is turned over. So you have a backwards image, which really only matters if you're doing a portrait, because people don't have symmetrical faces and people will look really weird if you draw them the way you see them on the plate. They'll look backwards. Or text, obviously. Any kind of text, you have to write it backwards or shoot it photographically backwards.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. And the kind of printmaking you do, you lay the paper on the substrate, or the substrate, I guess, would be the paper. You lay that over, and then it's a press, right? That actually pushes the image onto the paper.
Yes, or into it.
Into it.
We use an etching press, which has essentially 2 rollers on the top and the bottom, and there's a press bed that glides in between them. And the tighter you tighten those 2 rollers together with a micro gauge, it creates more pressure. So the ink is typically in these little grooves in the metal plate down low. The paper is wet or damp over top of it, face down. And then there's these etching blankets, which are pressed felt that lay on top of that. And the reason you have the blankets is because they compress the paper down into the ink, and it lifts the ink out of the crevices of the etched plate onto the paper or into the paper. We also here do many with a lot of our artists, watercolor monotypes or oil-based monotypes. And that is a totally different kind of, sub part of the printmaking genres. And it's closer aligned to lithography because it's on the surface. It's a planar technique, but we use etching presses because we still use wet paper, especially with the watercolor. The trick is having really damp paper and an unsized paper if possible. And then it's pressed with very, very tight pressure onto dry watercolor. And it literally almost tattoos the fibers of the cotton paper. It goes into them. It's really cool. And so we've developed that technique over the last 25 years. And many of our artists use it to this day because it's very easy for them to do it. It's non-toxic. They come here to the studio. They stay here. They can go downstairs and work all night long. And many of them do this, and they'll just paint all night long, all kinds of things, whether it's a landscape on a sheet of vellum or just a bunch of different colors that they cut up and make an abstract composition. But they can do that and get prepared for me to come in the morning, and then we collaborate on the press together.
And some of the work is just phenomenal. I mean, I've been looking at some of the pieces as you go down the stairs, and just beautiful. And then we saw a young lady's pieces last night.
Yes. Yeah.
What was her name again?
That was Sari Davidson. So she is one of my artists. She's based here in Steamboat, and she's kind of not necessarily or wasn't an artist all her life. She has a degree in psychology and music. And she teaches this little class for children called Music and Me. And they basically get together and sing songs, and it's really fun. And she has a great voice. But she had gone to art school many, many years ago. And about 5 or 6 years ago, she started taking one of our classes, ongoing classes that we have at the studio called Studio Sundays. And that is a monthly class where we focus specifically on one technique for 6 hours, and we just really get into it, whether it's dry point, stencil printing, silk aqua tint, various different things like that. And so she kind of went through all of that for 2 years, basically. Then she moved on to, I have an ongoing 8-week class for adults, and she went to that and was in that class for about 2 years. And now she's printing privately with me, and she's using watercolor with stencils and doing landscapes and these beautiful, beautiful kind of macro versions, which are close-up butterfly photographs that she takes herself all over Steamboat, and then essentially creates this very out-of-focus oil-based background, which these watercolor stencils are placed onto of the flowers and the butterflies. So they're very crisp and sharp and just, pop forward towards the viewer.
Yeah. And they were lovely.
Thank you.
And she's also the president of the Sue Oehme fan club.
It's unofficial, but yes, she is. She's the
I just wanted to tease you a little bit about that. That was
She'll
so
love
funny.
that.
Yeah. So it was a pleasure meeting her and seeing her work, and in the collaboration that you're doing with her. So
yeah.
And having you there to talk about it. And
Yeah. Well, as you can tell, I like to talk about printmaking, and I really do. I think it's so fun. I just love telling people how we did it. And I travel a lot to different print fairs. Hopefully that will happen again soon.
Yeah.
But that's like the best part of it for me. I bring all of the new things that we've done over the last year or two to every single one. Like these are in New York and Boston and Chicago and wherever. And I just get such joy out of explaining how we did things to people. And then they just really get into it. And it usually like draws a crowd of people around the booth, and, you know, it's very fun.
Yeah, we've talked to a couple printmakers, but I'd never seen the process done. So yeah, and going into your studio and seeing the presses are really cool. So you have 2 presses. One's a portable press, but to use the term lightly,
Air
right?
quotes, yeah.
Because it's so heavy. Now the larger one, what's the biggest print you can make on that? Or do you do, what's the biggest print you can make on that?
Well, that one is the biggest standard size tack etch printing press, and it's called a 4484. So we've just this year, I've worked with 2 artists, Catherine Schumann Miller and John Odlin, who both did gigantic prints. Kathy's wood block, it was a wood block print. I'm trying to think right now. It was about 38 inches by 58 inches or something. Wow. So with a border too, that's even larger than that. That's definitely as wide as we can go. We can go a little bit longer than that. So
sure.
So it can make a really big print. And I've done, like, Mood Ring is a very, very large print. I've done a series of vertical ones that are about 60 inches long that are basically fit on the press, you know?
Right. So, and then you could go bigger by doing diptych and triptychs or whatever, you know?
You could piece things together. Right. Yeah. And do that. There is a limitation with the paper, you know, some of the largest paper that we can get that I know of is essentially 60 inches wide, but it's by 100-yard roll. So you can have a giant roll or scroll type print.
Oh, so never even thought of that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I was just kind of curious because I seen it and it's pretty, it's definitely like wide. So, but I was wondering like what size you could do. So thanks.
Yeah.
You've been doing this for a long time and you're a master printmaker. What does that entail? How does one become a master printmaker?
That's a good question. It is essentially a self-proclaimed title. However, there is one institution where you actually get a certificate, but that is primarily only for litho, and that's Tamarind. So Tamarind, I'm not even sure what it is. It's not a university, but Tamarind, which is in Albuquerque, you go through a 2-year training process and you learn everything. You learn all the technical, you know, how to etch stones, how to grind stones, everything. For me, you know, it's a designation that you attain once you get to a point where you are essentially shepherding a project and collaborating with another artist from the very beginning all the way through to the very end. So that means, and this is what we still do, is meeting an artist, doing a studio visit or 2 or 3 sometimes, kind of going through the preliminary planning for the project, doing all the preliminary things that we can do beforehand. I have an artist arriving later today, Deborah Zlotsky from New York, and I'm thrilled to work with her. I can't wait to work with her. We have been talking on the phone for hours and hours and hours in the past 2 years together to figure out how we're going to approach this project. So we have some stuff lined up already. Then the artist will come, and then I function like as the guide and the coach and the, the minister, and, so essentially I have to look at an artist's work. First of all, I have to like it. That's a prerequisite. So it's somebody that I just like their work just, knocks my socks off. It's like, well, okay, I'm going to try to work with them. And very often it's also something where the first time I might see someone's work, I know exactly what I think we could do, that would be really cool. And it's never copying their painting or their sculpture, but that's a jumping off point. And I want them to create something using the kind of the similar practices that they have in their studio, but it goes to a different place. And I love it when they take something home with them that they learned in the print studio. Like even something as simple as putting some color on a little scrap of acetate and walking up to the wall and rubbing it onto their canvas. And it just changes the effect of how that pigment goes onto the surface rather than brushing it onto the surface. So anyway, and then guiding them through the whole print project, the week or two that we're together. And oftentimes, like with David Rowe, I spent literally 2 weeks living in the etching room, which I showed you last night is not the greatest place on earth. The little tiny, hot, stuffy room with an aquatint box and a lot of chemicals. Woohoo! We made together 22 different copper editions with 3 or 4 plates each in 2 weeks. It was insane. Some of those were cut and shaped plates as well. Anyway, so then getting them to that point where we realize their images, their ideas in print form, and then we sign everything. That's the last day of the project usually. Sometimes we don't even make it to that, and I have to send things to them later. But we try to get to that point where we sign either BATs, and that BAT is like the prototype for an edition. It stands for Bon à tirer in French, good to pull. And then once they've gone, then we try to schedule in all of the printing time that we need. Now, having said that, this is kind of a little confession out there, so we may cut it. But so David Rowe was here in 2012, and we are still finishing like 3 of his editions out of those 22.
Wow.
Because it's just so much work. It is so time consuming. Each print can take 1, 2, or 3 printers, depending on how many plates there are. It can take an hour and a half to print 1 print. So when you start thinking about it and a work week and all the other things that we're constantly doing, it's very, very difficult to get the time to really dedicate it to that process and get those done. But which is also kind of what led me to start guiding people into doing more monoprint or monotype projects, because everything is done right then. We print everything together, we sign everything, we're done. And that's the end of it. And then obviously is the second whole half of my life, which is selling everything and putting them on the website and having them in shows and all that kind of stuff.
So when you're doing these are all original. Can you do multiple prints of the same monoprint?
No, not of a monoprint.
So it's pretty much one-off.
Yes. And that's a really good point. That this is one of my pet peeves about my whole life about printmaking. And I still haven't come to grips with how or figured out how to talk about this, because what we do here and in all of my colleagues' print studios, they are considered original pieces of art, even the editions that we create. And that the designation really comes from this group called the International Fine Print Dealers Association. It's kind of like the Better Business Bureau for printmakers. And the artist has a direct hand in everything, whether it's, scratching on a copper plate or doing an ink drawing that turns into a solar plate that's exposed onto a photo plate. So there's that element that the artist has their own hand in the work, and they're all hand printed. They're not ever printed digitally. So this is a big, big difference from digital prints. And there are some really beautiful digital prints. I remember a long time ago, one of the first artists I saw that had done these archival pigment prints, and his name was Ashley Bickerton. And he did these computerized drawings that he then also tweaked in. At the time, it was so long ago, I think it was only Photoshop was available, but he kind of like oversaturated the colors. And so when they were printed, there was no way at all you could do anything even remotely like it with a traditional technique. And actually that brings me all the way back to the 5 forms of printmaking, because I'd never said the 5th one, which is digital. That's the newest thing now. So in my own little world, I'm constantly battling against that, because there are many artists, and I totally understand it, that they have to put their children through college, but they will maybe scan a painting and create what's called a G-clay print, or other things, iris print, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's really just a copy. It's just a glorified, beautiful poster.
Yeah.
What we do are original pieces of art, and they're collected by museums as such and recognized by museums as such.
Yeah. And I didn't really think about that until we were talking last night. And then I was realizing, oh, these are all like one-off originals, because I was looking around one of one.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh, okay, that totally makes sense. Now I come from the printing industry, the commercial print, where you burn a plate and then you ink up your press,
right,
and then you run thousands of copies of the same thing, right? Because it's for, it's for consumer, products, brochures and stuff. So it's, same kind of similar process, but this is so totally different than what I was really expecting. So that's why I was really interested in the process, because, just to kind of wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we do editions here, but they're very, very small, because, as I said, they're super time consuming. So I would say the biggest edition here at Oehme Graphics was maybe 20 prints. Also, though, with the edition, for any edition in a fine art print publication, there are almost always additional artist proofs, exhibition proofs, trial proofs, printer's proofs, those kind of things. Those pieces are considered part of that whole unit of that edition, and a reputable print studio will give their clients a documentation form, and all of those different parts of that edition are listed clearly, so that the client collector would know that, okay, there are actually a total of 18 prints in the world that look just like this. They're all numbered, they're all labeled by the artist when they're signed, and there's no more. That's it. So once they're done, then the plate or the stone or the block is canceled, and that is exactly as it sounds. It's a giant X that is put through the image, so it can't be used again, can't be printed again. In the old days, studios would actually print the cancellation proof, and it would stay with the studio. We don't do that anymore. It's just one of those things. We just don't have time to do all the other stuff as well.
Right.
But we have all the plates still in our studio here. And then the studio also keeps that bonatire that I talked about earlier. That stays with the studio. So eventually, at some point, the Oehme Graphics archive of those BATs will go somewhere. I'm not sure where, to some university or a museum or something.
That's cool. Thanks for sharing that process, because nobody thinks about that.
Yeah.
Except for crazy people like me. Like, I'm really interested in the process. So anyway, thanks.
Back to being a master printer.
Yeah.
You studied printmaking in college at University of Michigan, along with painting. But most of this has been hands-on, real-life experience working with other artists and other studios to arrive where you're at today.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah.
So when you graduate University of Michigan, where do you go?
I became a waitress in New York City. Woohoo! But I made a lot of money, and I was able to buy a loft with my then boyfriend. And so we had a loft in Williamsburg, which was at the time just starting to become like an art center. And now it's, of course, the Mecca for everybody in New York. So essentially, I was really trying to be an artist in New York, and it's hard, obviously. And to support my habit of being an artist, I was a waitress. And then at some point, I don't remember even how I did this, but I found out about a class at NYU in Manhattan with an incredible artist named Krishna Reddy. Krishna Reddy was a disciple, essentially, of this other man, historically speaking, in printmaking, and especially intaglio. He's kind of a god, Stanley William Hayter. So Hayter had Atelier 17 in Paris. I should know when, but I don't, like early 1900s or something like that, early 1900s. And he championed a technique called viscosity printing, which what he was doing was just kind of like lots of different literal layers or steps down on a surface of a plate, and different essentially oilinesses of the inks. They would either repel each other or bind together to create different colors. It becomes very scientific, very mathematical. His disciple, I keep calling him, he was just a student, but he loved Mr. Haider. And Krishna developed that concept even further at NYU, and taking it almost like pointillism, which was this theory of these little tiny dots of color that painted next to each other. They would create a secondary color visually when you stepped back from the canvas. And so Krishna took the whole theory of viscosity and thought about it, that if you inked yellow and it was in these deep down little pits in a plate, and then you rolled blue over it and they didn't blend, but when you printed it and you stepped back, it would turn into green. And it became this very, very cool thing that he did. So he taught these classes and I loved it. And I took 2 of them with him. And from that, I met a person who turned me on to my first internship. And so that was in Maine. And I got to go up to Maine for one summer, and I worked with Leon Golub and Nancy Spiro, and that did it. It was like, this is what I want to do. It's amazing just to watch them work and to break all these rules that you learn in college, or even, at NYU, as things you just don't do. Like, you don't take a razor blade and scrape away your image on a litho stone, because the intern will start crying because she has to green the stone later. But that's what Leon did. And it was so beautiful and effective. I don't know if you know his work, but he and Nancy, I think Nancy's also passed away now, but he did very, very strong political, huge, gutsy paintings of men being imprisoned wrongly, and just really strongly political work, and very deep impressions they made in me. And Nancy also did. Nancy was a champion of feminist art and printmaking. When I met her, she was already suffering from rheumatoid arthritis, so she couldn't really use her hands anymore. So she ended up doing all these kind of simple cutouts of female figures, and then she would use those over and over as multiples in printmaking, but they were all slightly different. And then she would install them on the wall in different, like almost like hieroglyphs or something, anyway, so that was great. That's how I decided to do it. And, yeah.
So you did that internship, and then did you work with some studios in the New York area before you moved to Steamboat?
So I met a man who was my mentor, Tony Kirk, and he had a press in my building, in the loft building that we had purchased. And he was kind of storing it there because he had just been hired at this really, really famous place, Tyler Graphics. So I started kind of interning and apprenticing with him virtually. And I learned a lot. He's an amazing master printer, amazing technique with hand wiping and such. So then from there, I kind of did a few random freelance jobs around New York City at different shops, which was really great because I learned a lot of different techniques. Like, everybody had their own little thing. Like one woman, Kathy Caraccio, would cut up these little like paper towels. She would cut them up into 9 mini paper towels because she didn't want to waste the paper towels. But it really made sense because there's this part where you have to wipe the edges of the plates and you only use a little bit, but you kind of really can't use that for anything else. So anyway, I think I was able to absorb all of these different techniques from all these different people. And then I was working on my first really big project, which was for Saul LeWitt at Watanabe Studio. And it was editioning 7 these gorgeous prints called 10 Vertical and Horizontal Lines back in 91. And I'm really old. Yes. Wow. Anyway, and I got this call from Tony, that they needed someone at Tyler Graphics. And I was almost done with this auditioning at Watanabe Studio. And I said, I would love to try. So I went in and interviewed with Ken, and I got it. And it was an amazing experience. So I worked there for 6 years under Tony in the etching department. But we printed Frank Stella and Helen Frankenthaler and, dropping names right and left here.
I love that.
It was fantastic. And I think the best thing about it was watching Ken Tyler really take on something that it just seemed like an insurmountable problem in how to do something. And generally it was something really big. So for instance, Jim Rosenquist was doing a series of colored paper pulp pieces. It's hard to say.
Tongue twister.
Yeah. And they were literally 10-foot square handmade TGL paper. This is a thing it's very famous. TGL paper. It's kind of like blotters or something, like super, super thick, very luscious cotton paper. But the paper department had just all this gorgeous pigment that they could infuse into the paper pulp. So he was doing this series called Time Dust, and so Ken rigged up a harness for him to hang in the air with this contraption on his back and this little gizmo, sort of like a soda fountain squirt gun that a bartender has, that squirts your tonic and your gin and tonic. And then he could just squirt these colors wherever he had to do it. And even more impressive than that was he wanted to have these circles, these like disc shapes of kind of yellows and oranges embedded in this section of the sky area, which was bluish purple. So they built this whole thing. They welded tubing, like copper tubing, to a framework that could hang over this sheet of paper, and Jim could just squirt the color down these little tubes to create these little pods of color at the bottom. I hope I didn't just give away secrets, Ken, but that's all I'll say about that. But it was really amazing to see how they would, an artist would come in and you could kind of just do anything you wanted there, and he would make it work if he could do it. If it was humanly possible, he would do that. So, and I really have so much respect and admiration for him and what he did over the course of his career. I named Oehme Graphics after Tyler Graphics because I just loved that. It was just so simple. Of course, Tyler is a much easier name to remember than Oehme, and especially people think I'm Japanese before they meet me because right. Sue Oehme, so...
And it's funny because I saw that you had been at Tyler, and I was like, oh, Tyler Graphics, Oehme Graphics. And
yeah.
I was kind of wondering about that. Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned
that's
that.
Funny.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, because you mentioned it last night, is really printmakers are problem solvers.
Yeah.
And a lot of artists are. I mean, they're looking at a canvas, they're trying to solve a problem. But really, printmaking is about how to solve this problem of how to make this do what I want it to do.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Yeah. That's kind of easily half of my job. And, for instance, with Deborah Zlotsky, who's coming in a few hours from now, she has sent us these kind of rough sketches of this abstract composition. It's very simple with kind of like these curves and shapes and everything. And it took us so long just to figure out exactly graphically how to fine tune it to the point where we could have elements cut that are individual little plates or shapes that are going to go together like a kid's puzzle almost. And that's kind of not the greatest example, but I'm literally always trying to figure out what went wrong, or how can we change this, or how can we make this better, or something like that. So, yeah, and I'm very lucky that I get to do that. So my dad was an engineer, and he wanted me to be an engineer. I think I could have done it actually. I really do, but it didn't call to me, obviously, but there's so much of that. There's so much science involved and lots of math, lots of fractions. So
I was just going to say that. And to be honest with you, because I didn't know much about printmaking until I had the opportunity to hear you speak at the 10th anniversary show that was put on at Space Annex. And I was like, wow, I had no sense, or I didn't realize, because I just don't have any of that background, just how complicated and sophisticated.
Yeah.
And just the breadth of it all. I was astounded. I was like, I was just completely enamored. And I can appreciate it from a photographic standpoint, because I come from the age of analog, before the digital age, and the science and all that goes behind it. But I mean, printmaking is like a whole other like universe, you know. It's just, it's amazing.
Yeah. And not to get too technical here, but very often a lot of the artists that I work with are their paintings are very, very loose and gestural and really fresh feeling, and they just kind of hit it. They just get to the canvas and they do their thing. And to recreate that kind of imagery with printmaking is extremely difficult, to make it look that fresh and quick. And so it's kind of counterintuitive. It's almost like the more it looks like that with their painting, the harder it is in printmaking to have that happen. And part of that is, again, going back to the watercolors. That's why I've sort of started leading people that way, because it is more closely aligned with their painting practice. And I think a lot of them, it was a struggle to try to get something that they were happy with that didn't look pushed or didn't look like forced on us. And so that's always a good day when I can figure that out and make it look really good and really just the way they want it, you know?
Yeah. And that's what makes you a master printer.
Yeah. Yep.
It's beautiful.
So that process is a really good jumping off point for a lot of painters. Is that correct? As far as...
Oh, the watercolor?
Yeah.
I very often start with it with an artist, because number one, the mirror image effect. They learn that right away. They learn that's the first print that they see. And sometimes it doesn't matter at all. Sometimes it's very, very critical, and they have to start really thinking about it before they do their work. But it's a way for them, just being me. I'm like, as I said, the uber multitasker. I don't like it when they have downtime. So if I'm working on etching plates in the etching room, I can let them, once I've taught them the process of watercolor monotype, they can be out in their section of the studio doing those and working on them. And we're both working towards the same goal at the same time. So it's like a little horse race between us, you know? And I just always feel like they like it more when they're just constantly busy and doing something. One of the things with the watercolor painting that's really beautiful, it's a little hard to describe just verbally, but you have to kind of see it. But so say you have someone who paints a bunch of yellow marks, and then they have another sheet of vellum, which is functioning as the plate, and they paint a bunch of red marks on that, and then another piece of vellum, and they paint blue on that. Once you put those, printing them one by one on top of each other, each of those different plates, the marks retain their integrity and their edges and their shapes and their color. And even where like the red goes over the yellow, you'll get basically an orange, but you can see it's from the red and the yellow coming together. As opposed to if you were painting it, it would just merge together. The watercolor would just reactivate and turn into orange right there. So I love that layered effect that you get when you print multiple layers of the vellum on top of each other. And that is the biggest reason why someone like Sari Davidson would choose to do the watercolor monotype, because it ultimately has a different look than a watercolor on paper does, where you just paint it directly on the paper. It's embedded into the fibers of the paper, and it has a different look.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. And you can definitely see that when you're looking, and, you know, we spent time in the gallery last night looking at her work. And it was really interesting. So you're working in New York, and then you get this job offer to come here to Steamboat.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And that's how you kind of like make the cross country trek and make it out to Colorado to work at River House Editions. Yeah.
Life number 2 or maybe 3. I don't know. That's what it felt like. It was a saga. I moved out here. My parents actually met me. They caravanned with me. They were in Michigan, and they kind of drove down, and we went on Interstate 80, and like we arrived in we arrived in Steamboat in late October of 1996. And I left New York City 4 days earlier, and it was full on summer. It was still green trees, full on summer. Pennsylvania was like getting orangey red. Got to Wyoming, it was like November, and like Thanksgiving, going to grandma's house. And then we get to Steamboat, and there's like 3 feet of snow in my yard of this house that I rented sight unseen. And, after 2 months of preparing to move out here with every worldly belonging I ever had. They lost all my stuff in moving. They found it later, about a month later, but I had nothing for about a month. It was nuts.
Wow.
And so it was, here's winter, here's Steamboat Springs. This is what you got. And when I came out to interview out here, it was August. It was early August. And my soon-to-be boss took me to the rodeo, and I was like, oh, I'm going to find me a cowboy, and, he's going to read like Jane Austen. And that did not happen, but I met a really, really, really wonderful person, and we have a son, and yeah, it's great. So I realized after I got here, first I thought it was for the job, but then I realized it was to meet Randy and to have Jason. So they're wonderful.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And you were offered, you were the director there, is that correct?
Yes. So I was hired actually as a co-director. The person who had been the master printer for probably 10 years or so, she had just given her notice. She actually was a master printer in New York that I had freelanced for back when I was still in New York, and she was. But then she moved out to Steamboat to run River House, and then she decided to do something else or teach. And so I was actually hired alongside this person named Deli Sacciolato, who is in printmaking. Everyone will know that name. He's one of the co-authors of sort of the Bible of printmaking that every printmaking student has it. And it's this black and white book, and the text is like mirror imaged on the front. So you get that immediately. You understand that. And he was going to essentially run all of the sort of projects, like starting the projects. I was going to do all of sort of the editioning and all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, after 2 weeks, he decided he didn't want to do it. So I was suddenly thrust into this position that was probably a little over my head, honestly. And I knew how to do everything, but I had never done anything to the scale that I was just about to start doing it. And my very first project was with Judy Ledgerwood from Chicago. And we did plates that were 36 by 48 inch copper spit bite aquatints, and all of you printmakers know what I'm talking about right now. It was crazy, crazy hard. I was working every night until like 11 or midnight just to kind of stay on top of all of it. And we got beautiful, beautiful things at the end, but it was a challenge. So that's where the learning as I went really came into play. It really started to happen there. And, and there were many other examples like that with other artists, but Linda Banglis, I worked with her when I first, called her. She was actually in a residency in Greece, and she said, I want to do watercolor monotypes. This is ages ago, before I was really doing it with anyone. And she said, yeah, we do it on vellum, and then we can just print on all kinds of Asian paper. It'll be great. I was like, okay, great. So I bought vellum, but I bought paper vellum. So here's a tip for everyone. Don't use paper vellum for watercolor monotype. It's the one brand that I use a lot, and I should have bought stock in it about 20 years ago, is called Denryl Vellum. And it's basically a frosted mylar, but it's very, very smooth, grained very smoothly on both sides. It's exactly the identical on both sides. And it's plastic, so it's completely impervious to the watercolor. So the watercolor evaporates on the surface. So meanwhile, I bought the wrong stuff. None of it worked. And we figured it out in the long run, but it was kind of one of a really good learning moment for me. So
kind of trial by fire all the time, right?
Yep.
Like figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And then they're not failures. They're a learning experience.
Exactly.
And you take that knowledge and apply it to the next time around.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And you were hired based on where you came from at Tyler, and that experience working there, and obviously you worked with some very high profile artists. Yeah. And so that experience had to be invaluable, and being asked to come to River House.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm sorry if I took you off track. I think it's interesting that River House is in Steamboat.
Yeah.
You know, it's like this little, well, I don't know little, but it's this, I wouldn't imagine Steamboat having something like that here. It just, I could see like Denver or Boulder, something but Steamboat's, out in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, right. This little oasis of beautiful town, but you have something amazing like River House.
Well, yeah. And so my former boss, Bill Van Straten, I just have to say, get off my chest. We had a tough relationship. He was a tough person to work for. He had a vision. He had a property north of here in this little town called Clark, basically, which is where the big fire is right now. Literally, it's about maybe a quarter mile from the old property that he owned and the old River House. But he had this vision to have this print studio out here and have the artists come here to Steamboat because it's beautiful, and have them, the River House was actually on the Elk River in the National Forest. It was this funky little fishing cabin. The studio was quite nice. It was a completely rebuilt barn, basically, kind of similar to downstairs, not quite as big. But the cabin was just so funky and quirky, and it was weird, totally non-compliant staircase, and just and we all loved it. It was really fun, and we would sit out by the river and have lunch every day, and it was really beautiful. So it was very idyllic, and it was very much a retreat for the artists, and it's so focused, and they would just work really, really hard. I ran River House for 14 years, so I obviously was able to power through some of the difficulty, but after a little while, after maybe 2 or 3 years being there, he actually purchased a warehouse down here in Steamboat, very close to where we are right now. And that was also funky, not in a good way. But it was big. It was really big. And so over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, I kind of redesigned all the different spaces in that building. So we had a giant etching room and a giant photo room. And it was very lovely in that respect that it was so great to be able to work there. And we had a whole separate studio for the artists we could be running an artist project with someone in-house at the same time. On the other end of the building, we could be editioning because they were completely separated from each other. So that was lovely. I do miss that, the huge size of that space. But anyway, so that's why I was here, and it really, when I first moved here, first of all, the original master printer, Patricia Branstad, was here. She is a phenomenal printer, printed for Clyde Oldenburg, and I mean, another name dropping right there. But so she was here, then I moved here, and then there were a number of people that used to work under her that had sort of, in the first few years I was here, they all went to New York and printed in New York, and then they came back. So Steamboat has a ton of really amazing printmakers that live here.
World class. World class, right?
Yeah. So anyway, and then I finally decided to leave there, kind of a combination of the recession and other things. And I just felt like it was time for me to finally do this, to have my own place and really just run the whole thing. The biggest difference was I didn't do money at River House, and now I have to deal with money and finances, and that's, the downside.
And I was going to ask you about that. Obviously, it was very practical, all this experience leading up to you having your own studio.
Right.
Did you get much of that business side of things? Obviously, you would observe stuff, but you said that you weren't really hands-on with the financial end of things. Were you able to incorporate any of the things that you saw other people do, either good or bad, or was it really just kind of like jump in with both feet and figure out how to make this thing work on the business side of things?
Well, the one thing I did do financially at River House was this whole concept called project costing, which is essentially where the master printer figures out everything, all the materials, all the labor, including photography of the artwork, color correcting of the photographs, all that kind of stuff. So I did do all of that, which then was given to the office, and then they would work out, arrangements financially with the artists. And I know from all the time I was with them, I did learn all of the ways that financially it's sort of classically established with an artist. This all though kind of goes back to sort of a earlier time in fine print publishing, when very often the publisher was supplying all of the funds for the whole thing. So there's three different entities in fine print publishing: the publisher, the printer, and the artist. And so those three different pieces, they each get essentially an equal part of whatever is finally the outcome of the project. Usually the artist and the publisher are paid later, sadly, but that's the classic formula. The printer is usually paid first. So in my case, and in Riverhouse's case, Bill was the owner, and so he was the publisher. I was the master printer working under him. So it was kind of like sort of combined in a way, so because he would pay me. But here, I am all of it. I'm the publisher and the printer. And so, and also though, that formula, that third, it's kind of morphed over time. And it's really, a lot of my colleagues have moved to different methods and different ways of kind of setting it up with their artists. And we have too, actually, because it's much, much easier, because trying to figure out all of the costs for every single thing, and this can be a project that takes multiple years to complete it, it's a nightmare. So I'm in the process right now of transitioning all of it into a much simpler method where we call it co-publishing, where the artist pays a fee, which essentially works out to be about half of the cost of running the project. So I'm putting in the other half by doing the work. And then at the end of it, I consign all the pieces and then market and sell them. So it's a much, much simpler formula. It's very easy. There's no real, intricate accounting that has to happen. But that was the biggest learning block for me, and learning QuickBooks too, so, and I did it. I learned how to use QuickBooks and do all that. And I do most of it myself right now. But soon that will be changing. I just hired someone, so I'm very excited about that.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, people don't think about it. You're wearing all these different hats.
Yeah, I fixed the toilet too. So there you go, right?
So you've had all this wonderful experience, and you've name dropped a little bit. What was it like working with some of these incredible artists that, are in history books and all that? What was that experience like?
Oh, I'm going to cry. I'm thinking of Louise Fishman. So, the art world has just lost this amazing, amazing force of nature. And she was someone similar to Leon Golub, my very first thing, where he was scratching on the stone with a razor blade. She just was fearless. And she would try anything. I remember her blotting her watercolor. This is back in like 2003, blotting watercolor. And then she took this paper towel and unfolded it and was like, oh, look at that. Can we print this? And I said, well, I don't know. Let's try it. And it was beautiful. Just things like that. Like, she just really opened my eyes. And many of the artists did this too. Like, I feel like I have such an amazing position to get to see their problem solving and their thought process in action. And it's not something you can really even describe. You just literally witness it, like, oh, or sometimes there'll be a aesthetic decision about a piece. And I'm like, wow, I would never have done it like that, but wow, that really works, and then it just makes you start thinking about it a little bit deeper. So anyway, Louise left us about 2 weeks ago on this earth, and she's going to be very, very deeply missed by many people. And I'm still processing it right now. I'm not really there yet, but she was just an amazing person and very, very generous. And I'll tell a little story right now that we were in a project when she died, a long distance project because of COVID, and she couldn't get out here with her wife, Ingrid. And so we essentially prepped all of this vellum and sent her a giant box of watercolors. And then she would paint on them in her studio upstate New York and call me. And we'd have really funny conversations about what she was doing and what can I use acrylic? I'm like, no, don't use acrylic because it won't work. And so then when she was done with all these, we sent about 25 pieces out and she returned them to us in this beautiful box that my assistant Teddy made. It was gorgeous. So one day in the middle of the printing or the painting part of it, she called and I was kind of down and she sensed it and she said, "What's wrong?" And I just told her this little sad story. Like, we had thought we were getting a very good PPP2 loan, which is the payroll protection program. And we found out, my bookkeeper told me that there was an issue with timing or something. And so we lost it. And I was devastated because this was many months after the initial shock of COVID and losing multiple tens of thousands of dollars of projected income in one day. So Louise and I figured out the problem she was having with her watercolors, and she hung up. And then she called me back about 10 minutes later and she said, "Sue, just listen, don't talk. I don't want you to talk. And this is what Ingrid and I want to do. And we are giving you some money. I'm not going to say how much, but it was significant." And I just burst out crying because it was just such an amazing thing that if I had that ability, I would do the same thing. And I told her, I said, "Louise, this is like the most human thing anyone could possibly do. It's so amazing." And the fact that they were so cognizant of their abilities to help others, and it was not just me, they did that with so many people and helped so many, particularly women, but just, she was such a force in the art world and so generous and such an incredible artist too. I mean, her works are just beautiful. You go look at them. They're gorgeous. Very, very filled with emotion. And it's like the paint was coming out of her arm or something. It's amazing to see them. So
that's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Your relationship with River House ended and you decided to do what you're doing now, which is Oehme Graphics. What was the catalyst for this happening here? You have a very interesting story that you told me yesterday about how this particular studio came about, because you were interested in a different studio space here in Steamboat.
Yeah.
And then this all came to fruition through something kind of magical.
I'm going to cry again. My parents both passed away within about 6 months of each other. My dad first. My dad had physical problems, major physical problems. And he was taking care of my mom, who had Alzheimer's, and he kind of shielded my sister and I from how severe her disease had gotten. So he died, and it was really kind of unexpectedly, even though he was struggling with all this stuff. He was on the upswing, and then it just all went to hell. So it was very, very sad, heartbreaking. And then before my mom died, I was definitely having some issues with River House, and I actually had resigned. I had resigned as of December 31st on 2009. And it was a huge, huge leap of faith because my husband, Randy, who at that point was working as a plumber, and the recession had caused all of his, he was doing new plumbing installation, and all of his work had gone away, like in a cloud, a little poof. And so he hadn't had a job for 14 months. So I was literally ready to just do anything. I just had to leave. And anyway, I did this thing. I took a belly dancing class, believe it or not. Randy convinced me to do it. he's like, come on, you really want to do it? And I was like, I don't want to do it now. And I did. And I did it and it was super fun. And the teacher was like, oh, you're a natural. And I was driving home and it was the middle of winter, snowing like crazy. It was dark. And I also had a kind of a meeting with Bill, and I felt like I had won that meeting, and it was very long. And I started driving home and I was like, oh, I did it. And I was just feeling so like proud of myself. And I said, Dad, I was just driving and sort of looking up. I was like, Dad, I talked to Bill and it's all going to work out. And I did belly dancing. It was fun. And I said, say hi to Jenny. So my dog, Jenny, had passed away in December, just 2 weeks earlier or something. And I said, say hi to Jenny. And right then the street light over my car went ding, ding. It just like went on and off 2 times. Like it literally was like, okay. And I realized this is going to sound crazy. Everyone's going to think, oh my God, she's nuts. But I was filled from the top of my head, wrapping around my heart. I am not kidding you, with this warm, it felt like warm water. I just had this sensation of this total feeling of joy and love. And I knew it was my dad, and he was talking with me, and that he could hear me. And then I burst out crying, and I was still driving in the snowstorm at night. And I'm like, hold it together, Sue, hold it together. But then I was like, just like saying all this stuff. And I got home and I told Randy about it. And he looked at me sort of like I was crazy too, but it really, really, truly happened. And it made me, I've always been like afraid of dying. And it really made me feel like it's okay. It's really okay. I know he was okay. So 2 days later, I get a phone call that my mother has gone into a coma. And she had stopped, she couldn't swallow anymore. So she was basically dying of starvation, which is horrible. And I had like a project lined up, even though I'd given my notice. I still had maybe 3 more weeks to work. And Randy said, just go, just give it up, just go right now. So I got on a plane at like 5 a.m. in February. I flew out. I was with my mom for basically a whole day. And the second day, this hospice nurse walked in, who was the fill-in hospice nurse. And I kind of had this weird, like, oh, she's not going to know anything. What is she going to know about my mom? And she hasn't worked with her. And it turned out that this woman had been trained in and had lived in all 7 continents. She had been trained in all major religions. And she was just like an angel on earth, this person. And I started to tell her, we were both holding my mom on her shoulders, and she was in a coma, but she started to have this smile. Like it was like a Mona Lisa smile. I'm not kidding. Her feet were purple. Her legs were already dead. That's how weird it was. And I told this woman, Catherine, the story of what had just happened in my car with my dad. The thought of my dad. And my mom just smiled through the whole thing. Catherine we were both like crying. Catherine said, she knows it. She knows it. She hears it. And then, they brought me this lovely little lunch in there, and my mom took her last breath, and that was it. And I was convinced, I still am convinced, that my dad was there. He knew I was telling this story. Stop crying. Wes is crying.
I'm tearing up over here myself.
But it was absolutely life-changing. This whole week, these 2 things that happened in this 1 week. So my mom passed away. Unbeknownst to my sister and I, they had been extremely frugal and saved quite a lot of money. I mean, I'm not a millionaire or anything, but I was able to buy this building, which I love. And on that note, I had been looking for a building. It was like the hardest thing in the whole process to get this rolling. And I almost signed the papers on a different place, but I was looking, this is many months later after I'd written my business plan, and which I call my thesis. And I was trying to figure out where I was going to have this business. And I said, what do I do, Dad? I asked him another question. I look up, and then I look down on the floor, and the Steamboat pilot is laying on the floor with the classifieds open. And there's this ad for this beautiful, beautiful place, which I immediately saw the next morning and went into contract with 3 days later. So we have a stairwell that I'm sitting right next to that is very long, and you go up it and you lose your breath because it's so long and we're at altitude. And I remember when we moved in and I was running up and down the stairs to pack, get things in and move furniture in and whatever. And either way, going up or down, I was so happy, and I called it the Stairway to Heaven. I also like Led Zeppelin, so.
And there's all these beautiful prints that run from the front door all the way up the stairwell. Talk a little bit about that and what that's all about.
So the Stairway to Heaven project is essentially every artist that comes to the studio is asked to create an image that the only guideline is it's on a 12 by 12 inch sheet of paper. So they're square, they're quite small comparatively to our other things. And they have a huge variety of different styles and effects and looks and colors and everything. All of them are mounted in the stairwell. We did that in honor of our 5th anniversary project. So that's how long they've been in the stairwell. And they just lead you up the staircase. And each artist who participates in this, we put 10 artists together. And initially it was an annual thing. Now it's kind of like spread out a little bit longer because it's not very cost effective. So 2011, which is when I opened, those 10 artists that came, each of them gets one entire box set in a beautiful cloth bound clamshell portfolio box. And they get one of all of the other 9 artists' work from that year. So it's this incredible, beautiful sampling. It's basically a sampler of the artists that have come here. And it's installed chronologically in the hallway. I don't know if you realize that or not, but you go up on the left side, you go down on the right side, or vice versa. So
that's spectacular.
Yeah.
I've seen some of these boxes that you have in the or in your boardroom area. And one of Guts and Borglum.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't look at it, but the boxes are beautiful. So so it's kind of like that. Is what those additions were?
Yeah.
Put
so
in
those are called portfolios. It's a tiny sub genre of printmaking. And there are people that just collect portfolio suites of images. Most often they are editions, but not always. Like Louise Fishman did when she was here in 2011, she did 7 unique portfolio suites. They're the kind of the color of your shirt, this beautiful deep garnet red, and it's called Toot Suite. And each one had 6 unique watercolor monotypes that they're all the same size, obviously, because they're in a box together, but the images on each sheet of paper were all different sizes. So for Louise, because she's, just works abstractly and they're very kind of like monumental, even though they're tiny, they feel monumental. And they were just little bits of cardboard scraped with watercolor or something that overlapped each other and just really beautiful. I didn't get to show you guys the Guts and Borglum suite yet, which I'll do when we're done talking.
Yeah.
But that's kind of an anomaly for the studio. It's very unusual that we even were able to do it. But it's something I'm actually really still proud of, even though Guts and Borglum is not...
yeah, he's taking
anyone's
kind of a turn in
now.
history.
Yeah, let's say that. Yeah, and I believe it's rightly so. I have to say that it has created many just fascinating conversations in the studio between all of the staff and the person who brought the project to me. He's a resident of Steamboat. His name is Robert Ellsworth, as in Ellsworth Air Force Base. That was his grandfather. Okay. His step-grandfather was Guts and Borglum. So he inherited property, Robert inherited property in Texas. And he was walking that property one day this big ranch, and he came upon a well house and opened the door, and there were these dynamite boxes inside the well house, and inside the dynamite boxes were these 42 copper plates that had been steel faced. And the steel facing had completely rusted, like all these weird, like frost marks all over it, kind of. And it turned out to be these plates that were images of Gutzon Borglum's other sculptures besides Mount Rushmore, which is what he's known for, obviously.
Yeah.
And he was a brilliant sculptor, really, I'd say at the level of Rodin. I mean, just amazing technique, amazing muscle and underlayments of your muscles and skin, and just phenomenal. So Robert found these plates. He started the long process of trying to find a place to produce them, to print them again. And the more I learned about this whole thing, it was just fascinating to me, because they're dated from 1913. They are about 8 or 10 gauge copper, which is very, very heavy. They probably weigh 2 pounds each, the plates themselves. And they are photogravures, which is a very complicated technical process where you transfer a photograph onto the copper. And they're just beautiful. They're gorgeous, gorgeous objects, just the plates themselves. So Gutzon Borglum in 1913 had done this, had made all of these plates, or had them made for him, literally to print them on thin, cheap paper as virtually a brochure or a marketing portfolio, because there was no other marketing right then. That was it. That was how you did it. So he could have them printed at will, which means that they weren't all printed at the same time. They weren't a numbered edition. It was just meant to be anytime he needed one, they would print something. So what Robert and I came up with was essentially doing these again on really, really beautiful paper. We use this paper you can't even get anymore, called Revere Suede Soft White, and it's just gorgeous paper. And they're all classically hand wiped, which I think I talked about yesterday, but that's where you use the heel of your hand to wipe the ink off the surface. And it takes about 20 to 30 minutes per plate to wipe them. So far, I've done about 400 prints, and I'm only maybe a quarter of the way done.
Wow.
And then the original prints on the thin paper had been housed in a thin leather-bound portfolio, like just a folding portfolio. So what we did is we kind of used that as a jumping off point and designed and built this other really thick, it looks like an encyclopedia or something, if anyone knows what that is anymore. I do. Anyway, and so it's bound in leather and it's gold stamped, and they're all in there. And we're marketing them to like the Library of Congress, places like that. The Tread of Pioneers Historical Museum here in Steamboat, they mounted a show of every single print was framed and hung in this small gallery in the back, and it was beautiful. And Robert and I did a whole talk about it. So then that comes back to Gutzon Borglum, and my assistant at the time, this wonderful man named Max Schaller, who's not with me anymore, unfortunately, but he actually cooks for us. He's an incredible cook. So he cooks. He'll be here this week. And he started to Google and Wikipedia, Gutzon Borglum and all that, and research him. And he's like, I don't think we should do this. I don't think this is a good project. Robert decided to go ahead with it. But the more we talked about it, like I said, it just brought up all this stuff. Like, where do you draw that line? And I always come back to someone like Woody Allen, who's obviously a very bad person, but he's a genius, and he made incredibly beautiful films. And I feel like the one image that struck me, there are two actually, one of Abraham Lincoln that's phenomenal, but then Gutzon Borglum also depicted Atlas as a woman. And for me, being a woman and being, a strong woman, I just really felt that was so prescient back in 1913 to depict Atlas as a woman. And it's a beautiful sculpture. She's holding up the earth, this huge globe of marble, and she's weighted down by it. And you can see her gown trailing out. And it's just so, so stunningly striking. And I felt that, for all of his wrongs that he's, rightly accused of, I still think he was a very, very talented artist. I wish he hadn't done Mount Rushmore, but unfortunately that, as I say, it's history. So,
yeah. So what made you, why shouldn't he have done Mount Rushmore? Just out of curiosity. Well, because that's where I'm from, right? I live in Rapid City.
I did not. I sort of knew that. Yes. I did.
So there's the Guts and Borglum Museum in Keystone.
Yeah.
And
I can't wait to show it to you now.
Yeah. So my wife would have been crazy because she has to look in every box. Like she's like, what's in that? But I can kind of look at it and go, I want to know what's in it. But I knew I was going to address this. But so why not Mount Rushmore?
Well, and honestly, I don't know enough about it to really speak articulately about it. But obviously, before it was Mount Rushmore, it was extremely important in indigenous people's world, and it shouldn't have been tampered with. But it's like, this is one of those conversations that it brought up, that it also begs the question of how do you place something historically, and that at that time, everything was about big men. It was about big adventure and Ernest Hemingway and Teddy Roosevelt conquering the West and that kind of thing. And it was like Guts and Borglum was conquering this giant mountain. He should not have done it. Right. Now he would not be allowed to do it.
Right.
It wouldn't even be a cool thing at all. At the time it was, it was amazing. And also I have to give a shout out to his son, because really Robert's stepfather, and I can't think of his name right now, but I think it was Lincoln Borglum.
Yep.
So Lincoln Borglum was really the person who did all of the work. Gutson imagined it and envisioned it, but Lincoln really
finished it.
Yeah. Yep. So that's my take on it. But again, it's like I feel like you can't always judge everything by today's standards. You just can't. Right. It's not fair in my mind. Right. And, but having said all that, Max argued consistently against it. And he just felt that Gutson was such a horrible person, honestly. Yeah. And over time, and it's not that Robert didn't ever really defend his step-grandfather, but over time, he really, really started leaning more towards Max's point of view. And just recently he said, I kind of think we probably shouldn't have done this, even though they're beautiful. And to me, the process of wiping these plates was just such an incredible thrill. I'm wiping a piece of history.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I'm glad we're talking about this because we talk about this all the time. What's the line Bill Cosby? What's the line Michael Jackson? What's the line Gauguin, but there is a place where we have to separate the art from the artist. Yeah. And I can do that. Yeah. I can do that with Mount Rushmore. I can do that. I love Mount Rushmore. I visited since I was a little kid. Yeah. I totally understand. I agree with you. I think that project would never happen today. Right. Which is fine. Yeah. But I can remember every year, my dad, that was our vacation. We go to Black Hills and Mount Rushmore every year. And so I get pictures of me as a little kid. And then I ride my motorcycle. And when I do, my favorite ride is going through Keystone, Mount Rushmore, Hill City, and back around. And I'm always in awe at that. I mean, the genius of how he pulled that off.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And he had to move one of the heads because the stone wasn't solid.
He had to blast it off. He started, and there was a crack, and he blasted it off and moved it to the other side. Yeah. The one that I would be okay with them destroying is the one down in Georgia, Stone Mountain. So as far as I know, and this is based on something Robert mentioned, that he said that Gutson actually did destroy part of it, at least part of it himself. Okay. So again, that's sort of like, okay, well, there's that in him. There's this part of him. Everyone is good and bad. We're complicated, nobody is an angel. Right. I'm no different. I mean, there's wonderful things about me, but you're I'm fabulous. Thank you. I'll take that. And I'm interesting, and quite possibly the most interesting man. Quite possibly the most interesting man in the world. Says Todd. All the time. But yeah, we're complicated, right? Yeah, and yes, that's it. We're complicated. It's not just black and white. I feel like it's just not
cut and dried.
Yeah.
I've never been there. So Robert, actually, his brother lives on Guts and Borglum's estate up there. Oh. So ever since we started that project was started in 2016, maybe. And he's invited me and Randy to go up to the ranch. I can't even imagine this place, like a library filled with boxes of ephemera. I mean, it sounds like heaven, Right. So anyway, so we'll get up there.
I would love to go with you.
And I will introduce you when we go up. I'll let you know, and you'll come and see it.
So as a side note, I work for the Cheeseman Center for Democracy, and we had a replica of Mount Rushmore, and then we had the papers whose name is going to escape me but he was a senator that helped push this project forward. So I've read like letters from Guts and Borglum to Congress saying, I need more money.
Right.
This kind of stuff. Interesting character.
Yeah.
And he when he walked in the room, he thought he owned the place.
Yeah. He sucked the oxygen out of
right.
it,
And like he didn't pay for hotel stays in Rapid City. Like he stayed at the Alex Johnson and then didn't pay it. So somebody would be writing letters saying, hey, we need to get this paid. And so it was just like, he's I think he was an egomaniac to a certain degree, which, I mean, you almost have to be to do a project like that, I suppose. But so a complicated gentleman that did amazing sculptures.
But, and like you said, it brings up all of those other people that's in the same boat. It's like, okay, they did really, really nasty, bad things that they shouldn't have done. And I feel like, especially the more recent ones, that's a little different story because it is in the consciousness now of everyone. And it's like, come on, people, be good people, just like your shirt.
Right.
Last night, Todd had this fabulous shirt on. Be a good person.
Yeah.
That is my mantra right there.
Right.
That should be the basis of every religion. Be a good person there. But
I'm so glad we talked about this. This is fun because we ask this not all the time, but it's more than once.
But you are able to separate the artist from the art, and depending on the context of it, and still appreciate it for what it is.
And I think a lot of that in this particular case is because of the stories that Robert. I can't wait to introduce you guys. Robert is fascinating, and he has 4 properties in Steamboat, Texas, up there, so he's all over the place, and he's a fascinating man. He's a carpenter. He works on carpentry all the time, but he's told me so many stories about his growing up and about Gutson, and, like Gutson was a member of the KKK. That's like the most notorious thing that will come out immediately if you start to Google him. But at the time, a lot of people were in the KKK. Most of the people in Colorado were in the KKK. I'm not justifying it. I'm not, making it respectable. It's just the way it was.
And I didn't know he was a member. I knew that he
was granted membership as like a gift.
Right. Okay.
So it's not like he was actively in it. So, and that's little stuff that I've learned from Robert, from his step grandson. So, anyway, and again, as I said, I'm not justifying it. I'm completely 100% against the KKK. You hear me, guys?
Right. And we all are.
Yes.
And what's interesting, in Rapid City, somebody was remodeling a building in downtown, and they opened a trunk, and it was a bunch of KKK outfits.
Wow.
Evidently. Oof. So they were embedded in Rapid City and, all over. They were a pretty big organization, especially back in the turn of the century, But it doesn't make it right. But it was an interesting take on it.
Yeah.
I do love Mount Rushmore. I struggle with it too, because I totally understand. But just like when I stop and look at it, I'm always amazed.
Yeah. Well, it is an amazing feat that it was accomplished. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's a man over nature, not that that's right, but it is an amazing thing. So,
And then down the road, you have Crazy Horse. From one of a gentleman that worked for Gutson, and I think was either he quit or he was fired. I don't remember the story.
Yeah.
But and of Crazy Horse, there's no image of him. So it's just this made up, rock. And I remember the first time I seen it was a hole in the rock. And now you can see the face, and it'll never be done. It's starting to take form. It'll never be done.
Right.
But they do it all by private donations and stuff. But I think that was a kind of a response to the Native American community. According to legend, I think there's stories that said that he was going to do it whether he had their blessing or not. But supposedly, according to legend, he went to them and said, I want to do something for you. And this is what they came up with together. So, but anyway, interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a long time. What's one of the craziest things?
I'm 800 years old.
But you have this, you've had this really fantastic career, and you're just keep on cooking along here. And you have all these artists that come from all over the place to work with you. Mm-hmm. What's one of the craziest things that you've seen in your experience printmaking?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I'm going to have to think about that for a minute. There's so many. No, not really. I don't know. I can't come up with anything.
Sorry,
on that
I kind
one.
of threw that out there, but I was thinking, you've had all these very unique experiences, and I really appreciate sitting down and talking with somebody that's, master of their craft, master of what they do. And I just think it's extraordinary. And people like yourself are the most interesting people to talk to, because you do have all these wonderful stories about these things that have happened during the course of your career and the people you've had the opportunity to interact with.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, there are a lot, there's just nothing major that stands out, but one of the artists, John Walker, would come in and do some painting and then just go stand in the middle of the Elk River and fish in his apron. And I mean, all kinds of stuff like that, little just moments, that fill up all of it. So
I think people want to know what Frank Stella's like.
Oh my gosh, Frank Stella.
Maybe we can't talk
amazing.
about it.
No, I think I can. I mean, yeah, I can. Well, and first of all, too, the Ken Tyler Archive went to the Australian National Museum or something like that. Ken had his fingers all over the world. He opened up his print studio in Singapore after he closed the one in Mount Kisco where I worked for a few years. I was slated to go out there, but I just moved here to run River House, so I didn't end up doing it. You can look up the Tyler Archive and see there's a lot of really cool stuff. There's video of me, and they were filming constantly. They had an archivist on staff. And so we were literally being followed around with cameras, and which is funny because yesterday I had that photo shoot here and I was very uncomfortable with it because that hadn't happened in about 25 years to me. So, but, Frank Stella is amazing. And I just remember how fast he could think. And sometimes he would do what he would call a black and white version of one of these giant prints. I was working on like the Moby Dick series when I was there. And also this huge 24-foot long wood block, that right now it's slipping me at my mind what it's called, but it's in the Whitney. It's installed in the new Whitney. And all the little pieces that I did are right there. It's so cool.
That's awesome.
And, so he would do these black and white versions of them, which I'm going to show you along with Gus and Borglum.
Nice.
And Ken mixed up these blacks for him. He called them blacks, but it was like black ink, Charbonnel ink with apricot, which is like this beautiful apricot-y, orangey yellow, like my mic. Or black with violet sulfurino, or black with blue. And so there are these really beautiful tinted black colors.
Yeah.
And then on all these disparate little different plates that are cut out like a jigsaw puzzle, very, very irregular shapes and everything. And the Smoke Ring series, that was another one that we were working on. But it was just phenomenal to see this and the amount of ink. I mean, it was hundreds of dollars of ink that he just like whipping this up with his ink knife, and mixing all of it. And Frank and Ken are really, really good friends. Ken won an award a few years ago in New York at the International Print Center of New York, which is a wonderful organization. I go out there whenever I can to the fundraisers. So Frank introduced Ken for his award as a lifetime printmaker. And I remember watching Frank give the speech. I'm not good at public speaking. And I remember they had a pedestal that was clear plexiglass. So you can't hide behind it. So he's standing there holding this speech and he was shaking, and trying to do it. And he was great. He did a fabulous job. You would never have known it if you couldn't see through the pedestal. But he's just a really, really interesting man and loves to drive his car fast. And,
That's funny.
Yeah.
So what was Helen Frankenthaler like?
Oh, she was a piece of work. She was also a brilliant colorist. She would come in and, we were proofing something or whatever, getting to the point of editioning it. She'd go, oh, that pink is not quite right. And she was right. It was just not exactly the way it should have been. The color. She came in once, and I might have to cut this one. But let's see if I can say
Well, you
this.
Tell me if we have to, because otherwise I'm going to leave it in.
All right. Well, I'll tell this story. One time, the wonderful archivist at Tyler Graphics, Mary Beth Cohen Tyler, who also unfortunately just left us, she told me that Helen was no longer eating any food that had any color. So she was eating cottage cheese, yogurt, white bread with no crust, mashed potatoes. Everything had to be white. And when she told me that, I hadn't seen this film yet, but I subsequently saw the film called Painter's Painting. I don't know if you guys know that.
I've seen it.
Fabulous.
Love it.
It's very long. It's
Yes.
a little arduous to get through it, but it's just like for, memorabilia of these famous, wonderful artists. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
There was like 4 people on the crew. There's like a filmmaker, an editor, sound, and director or something like that. So Helen Frankenthaler in that film is much younger. She's sitting in the corner of her studio of these 2 white walls. And she starts talking about a painting, and she's literally seeing it on the wall. She's talking about this blue swoop and this whatever. And I remember just thinking, it was just like in the movie Amadeus, when Mozart is hearing the thing when he's dying, and he's like trying to get it out to Salieri and get it on paper. And it was just like that. It was so insane to see someone vision something so clearly on film. And then to know that she could not eat any food with color in it. It was really amazing.
Weird.
Yeah. But she was very, very interesting to work for. And I really liked, following her thought process and everything. But
yeah, I bet you that was fascinating. Those are 2 names that obviously most people will hear, Frank and Helen. I mean, they'll know those names. A lot of other names that you've mentioned, probably only people that are in the business would know. So thanks for sharing, name dropping, and sharing some stories about those, because that's always fun, right?
Yeah. Well, and there were many other wonderful artists at Tyler that I worked with. I would say probably my most favorite was a Japanese American artist named Masami Teraoka, and he lives in Hawaii, and his work is so crazy out there. He basically does these paintings that are essentially, it's a marriage, a wonderful marriage of East and Western thought and concept and everything. So he does these paintings that are like altarpieces from Byzantine chapels in Germany, but they're of Japanese geishas who are confronting Catholic priests with condoms wrapped around octopuses, or just like nuts, crazy, wonderful images. And obviously referencing repression and the Catholicism and all kinds of other things, all types of subjects, AIDS. He's very, very much into AIDS and talking about that and trying to keep that conversation going to help, focus people. But his work, I worked with a young Japanese printer who actually started at Tyler almost exactly the same, a week before I did, in 1991. And his name was Yasuyuki Shibata. He's a good friend of mine. And now he teaches at Cooper Union. And he's a phenomenal printmaker. But his specialty is called mokuhanga, which is a Japanese water-based woodblock printing is one of the oldest types of printmaking. And we talked about this a little bit the other day. Yeah. And it's essentially where the image is raised up on the surface. And then the difference between Japanese woodblock and Western woodblock, which was very much championed by German expressionists, like in the turn of the century, 1 century ago, those were oil-based. So you would be rolling oil color onto the block, and they're much heavier handed and very, I'm thinking of like Kirchner or people like that they were just full of angst and anger. And Japanese wood blocks are very often just ethereal and beautiful and delicate. Not that either one is better. I like angst and anger too, but you do this whole technique with this brush. It looks kind of like a shoe brush, and you brush watercolor pigment and rice paste on the surface of the whole block, even the part you carved. But then because it's overlaid with this rice paper, it's not actually rice, it's gampi, which is a wood, basically a bush. And you rub it with a baren. And so it only picks up the watercolor from the raised surfaces, and all of that color that's down in those little troughs that were carved doesn't print. And it's just a fabulously difficult way to print. But so Yasu and I teamed up, and then this was again, this perfect marriage of Eastern and Western thought on Masami's part, because he wanted to combine the different techniques in his prints and not just have it be just straight mokuhanga printing. So I did all of what would typically be a sumi ink, a black sumi ink block. I did it with an aquatint copper plate. So Masami drew these images on these copper plates that were etched. It's a long process. I won't go into it now, but very complicated technical process. And anyway, they became aquatints, these linear aquatints on these huge copper plates. So Yasu would print all of the color elements first, and then the whole thing would come to me at the very end, and I would print this aquatint on after days and days of printing color onto the paper. And they're really, really beautiful. They're gorgeous prints.
So how do you get the registration?
Oh, that was the hardest part.
Yeah.
It's tricky with the wood block because you typically have this like little cut edge, and you kind of set it into these two little jigs. It's way too complicated to try to explain it on this, but that was the hardest part. That was and it's often one of the hardest parts of any print project, is how to figure out how are we going to get this thing to drop right into that spot where it has to go, so it's not off kilter,
right?
Off registration. And the other problem for Yasu is that this paper, and again, this gets a little technical, but the papers are always dampened. They're dampened for the water-based woodblock, and then they're usually soaked a little bit more for the etching. And so the papers were shrinking and growing, and because they had to get dampened over and over and over. Right. So then it was like trying to fit everything together so that it was all still in register. That was very complicated.
Yeah.
But, well, there is a really cool thing about woodblocks of a modern person I didn't work with, but Francesco Clemente, who printed with Crown Point Press. So Crown Point Press is one of the top fine print publishers in this entire country or the world. And Catherine Brown is definitely a role model for me. I mean, she's an amazing, amazing printmaker and has done a phenomenal job with all of it that she's done. But anyway, so Francesco Clemente, they contracted with him to publish some prints, and they have their own printers over in Japan. And so this is hard to describe verbally, but he would do these like beautiful gradated watercolors, and a lot of them were portraits and faces or figures. And the way they did it is it's literally cut step by step by step by step. So there's say there's a shadow right here, but it's gradated to it. And it's like they print this in this really light gray, then they take away some. They print a slightly darker gray, they take away some. They print another gray, they take away some. So you end up with this sort of dark circle that gradates out to this light thing. And it's all from hours and hours and days and weeks of carving and printing over and over again. And if you look carefully, at these prints, you can see those little tiny gradations of where the printer carved it to create that illusion of the gradation. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So
see, I don't have the patience to do that. That would just be like insane for me.
Yeah.
I'm just amazed.
That's probably why I do photography. It's like 1/20th of a second or, and I'm done. Wow.
New Magazine is our media sponsor for the Tenet podcast. That's NUE. You can follow both the national and the Denver edition of New Magazine on Instagram. The national edition can be found at new_magazine and the Denver edition at new_Denver_magazine. Look to New for compelling stories from the world of art and fashion. Thanks for listening.
I'm Megan Wilbar, and you're listening to the Tenet Podcast.
I want to get back to what you do here at Oehme Graphics.
Okay.
And talk about what all, I mean, you kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning of the podcast, but talk about what all you offer here in the studio to artists that want to come. So this kind of gets back to, fine print publishing and sort of this old school method and the way publishers functioned back in like the 60s and 70s. And they would invite artists to come and do work and they would pay for everything. And then they would sell all the prints. That's kind of changed. It's become untenable financially for most studios. As I said, we now do co-publishing where they help cover the costs of the initial outlay of money. And it can be considerable depending on what they're doing. But also, as we grew, the first couple of years that I was open, I didn't have anything. I had no inventory. So I had this overwhelming feeling like I had to just print with as many people as I could. And all of the artists from River House came with me. Every single one, they said they want to come and they want to print here. So I opened with an ad in Art in America, and it had a list of all the artists who were about to come, and it was a photo of Steamboat and on the river. It's really beautiful. So then I started doing basically about 10 or 11 projects a year, coupled with the whole other side of it, the end side of it, which is going to these very, very high-end, beautiful, curated fine print fairs around the country. And essentially it's like a mini gallery basically that you go to. It's beautiful. They have great lighting and everything. And so there was a lot of travel involved and all that. And so the first 2 years, that was basically it. It was a ton of printing and a ton of travel. And then I realized I was going to die if I kept doing that. So I started to slow down the pace of all the projects, which was good. And then we were able to start catching up and getting the printing done, as I talked about. Finding time to fit the editioning in is a very hard task. Then I started teaching. So, and I've always loved to teach. I did a little bit at River House. We did sort of incidental workshops here and there. But now we have every summer we do anywhere between 1 and 3 Oehme Graphics week-long workshops, one of which is coming up in a week from Monday. And those are very limited. There are only 4 or 5 people at the most, because otherwise I can't keep up with everyone. I can't help everyone. And those are really, I'm kind of just throwing all of my knowledge at these poor people that come and pay money and trying to give them as many options to create their images, and as many different types of techniques, because all of the different techniques that we do here, even though they are all lumped under intaglio or etching, they're all very different. There's linear things, there's tonal things, there's textural things, there's stuff with levels or relief rolling. So trying to, and this kind of applies to the projects as well, where I look at an artist's work and I figure out what's the best technique for these people to use to create work that ties in with their body of other work. So anyway, so I started doing workshops, and now I travel a lot to do other workshops. I teach at Anderson Ranch, which is down in Snowmass, Colorado, near Aspen. They have a phenomenal nonprofit facility campus with all different kinds of woodworking and sculpture and painting and drawing and photography, everything. I teach at the Women's Studio Workshop in upstate New York, which is more focused on paperworks and printmaking. And next August,
a year from now, which was supposed to be actually 2 years ago, and then it was supposed to be this year, and now it's going to be next year. Thank you, COVID, is I'm going to be teaching at this castle, 18th century Italianate chateau, which is overlooking the Mediterranean Sea in the south of France, about 45 minutes south of Nice. And it is for the La Napoule Art Foundation, which is based in Denver. And it's this wonderful foundation housed in the chateau where Henry and Marie Cloos lived. They escaped Nazis. Henry was a sculptor. Marie posed as a maid when the chateau was under occupation by the Nazis. And they preserved all of his sculptures by burying them in the garden. It's a phenomenal story. So his heirs essentially have this foundation now. And all of the money that is brought in over the course of the summer workshops at this incredible facility in France goes to funding a program in the Denver public schools where they invite artists to create a curriculum program for 4 to 8 weeks, teaching underprivileged children, many of whom have never had a single art class ever. They haven't held a crayon in their hands, and it like makes me want to cry. So these artists are developing programs that are very self-reverential and just really like doing little dioramas, having the students collect tiny little things in their house that are very dear to them. And they bring them in and they create this little like self-portrait diorama. Or one artist did a whole series on how to mix skin tone, but that evolved into what is skin tone? Look at all of these different skin tones right here. And how many colors go into that color, to flesh, to skin tone. Anyway, so it's a phenomenal program, and I'm really excited to be part of it. And the only downside of it is they don't have a press, so we're doing non-press printmaking in France next August.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
And again, you get to apply your troubleshooting skills to see how to make all that happen, right?
Yeah, right.
That's fantastic. So you usually like 10 or 11 artists come through here in the course of a normal year?
Well, no, the first 2 years, that's what it was. Now
Okay.
I'd say a normal year is about six to eight. This year is already shaping up because now, many of the restrictions were lifted. And so a lot of the artists that had to postpone in 2020, now they all want to come. And so we've just been going gangbusters all summer so far, and back to back to back, and literally hardly any time to even get the studio clean for the next person, And there's all kinds of stuff after the project happens, mostly photography, putting all the things on the website, labeling everything, all that kind of stuff, the archiving of the project. So now I'd say 6 to 8 per year. And as I mentioned earlier, hopefully we will again get to travel and go do the print fairs, because it's really the best way for me to show all the new work to we have curators from museums. All the major museums fly into New York every year in late October. That's when it typically happens. And it's kind of the best thing, because it's like a reunion every year for all of them, because they get to have meetings together, and they go out to dinner together, and they take print publishers out, and vice versa. And also art consultancies. There's some major art consultancies across the country that place huge corporate collections, which we have a lot of pieces in many of those, and they all come too. So it's like this amazing, they call it Print Week in New York, and it's very, very fun. It's like my favorite week of the year. It's like Christmas.
Todd, I feel a road trip coming up sometime in October.
No, unfortunately it's online again this year.
Oh, man.
So they had to make that
Maybe next
decision
year.
because they had to, there's 3 different fairs that happen concurrently, and they all had to put down to huge deposits on these spaces that they rent in January. And in January, it was like, who knew what was going to happen? So there was no way they could do it. And so it's all online again this year, as it was last year. And for me, it's not the right thing. Like there's a lot of, we call it old master print dealers. I'm a contemporary print dealer and a print publisher, but the old master dealers have an amazing inventory of, you can walk in and go through a little bin of beautifully matted prints, and you find a Rembrandt and you find a Dürer, and you're like, it's phenomenal. But they have an entirely different kind of clientele than I do. And so for them, it's a little easier to have an online format because they have collectors who are looking for a very specific artist, a specific print, maybe even a specific edition number, very, very focused clients. And they will do research. They will search all over the world for this piece. And for me, it's much more about this, bringing these brand new babies into the world that are being published by leading contemporary artists. And this gets to the crux of why we do what we do, because, an artist like Melissa Meyer, who shows with Lennon Weinberg in New York City, she's had a very storied career over her long time. And sorry, Melissa. But she's a fabulous painter. So she'll come and do prints with me or any other fine print publisher. And they are generally maybe 1/10 of the cost of what a piece, a canvas would be. They're generally maybe half the cost of what a watercolor on paper would be. So it's a way for, especially a corporate collection or a museum collection, to have pieces by blue chip artists that they couldn't otherwise afford, or to have larger pieces that they couldn't quite afford, because we do a lot of really big prints. And that's, so it is following in the tradition of printmaking, which initially was for the masses. It was like an artist like Dürer. I'm not sure if you guys know who that is, but kind of the father of engraving, a master engraver, which is carving metal with a tool and parallel lines that are absolutely perfect. And, so he was also a painter. And he realized that if he could do this and make this little plate that was beautiful, and it could be printed over and over and over, hundreds of times in his case, because they could be, and they didn't have as many regulations and rules set in place at that point, but he could get them out to more people. And so it was really such a democratic idea. That's partly probably why I like it so much, but, and it's the same concept that we sort of function under here.
Yeah, we've talked about the democratization of artwork all the time. And, and it's interesting to see somebody's take on that, because a lot of people, they want to sell the big piece for thousands and thousands of dollars. But, having different price points for different projects is always great to get your work out there. Yeah. So, yeah, that's cool.
Yep.
So how many artists do you work with here? I mean, obviously you have the workshops, but outside of that, as far as visiting artists, and do you represent, because you're kind of representing them, right?
Yes, I do represent them. So, but I represent just this one piece of their body of work. So we represent the prints that we do here at Oehme Graphics. Occasionally, and this has actually happened a little bit more recently, I will also consign other prints that generally, these are artists that do their own prints. They're really into printmaking. A lot of the artists that I work with don't know anything about printmaking at all. So that's where I come in as this coach and this guide to get them through the project. And they would never go back home and make prints, but there are a few that do. And they use like this one, an artist I'm thinking of specifically is Dorothea Van Camp. She's based in Boston, and there's a big piece of hers right in the middle of the gallery there. And she routinely uses silkscreen, essentially these little silk-screened elements. They're like continuous line drawings that she creates essentially in Photoshop, but then turns them into a silkscreen. And they're just kind of an element, like a punctuation mark or something that she uses in her abstract work to kind of, your eye travels through it and then you stop at this thing. And she'll do that on her painting. She'll silkscreen directly onto a canvas to create that same effect, as well as she'll do this with her prints. And so the print that we actually have in the gallery right now is one that she did herself. We didn't do that with her. So yes, so I represent those works for those artists. And I think we have close to somewhere around 50, 55 artists that we've worked with now, many of whom have come multiple times. And that's one of the things, I was talking earlier today about how I find someone. And the very first thing is I have to like their work. I can't do a project with someone if there's not something drawing me into it to start with. Oftentimes it could be someone I've never seen their work before. That's unusual, but it does happen. But sometimes I'll see it and I'll know exactly a technique, like, oh, we'll do soft ground with dry point and burnishing, or, something or other. And I really fall in love with my artists. And I just worked with an artist based in Denver named Lola Montejo. She shows with William Havoo Gallery. And I have long liked her paintings and followed her work and kind of seen her development. And it's very much like the relationship I started with Louise Fishman back in 2003. I lived in New York since 1981 to 1996. And I never once met Louise the whole time I lived there, but I saw almost every show that she had. And I loved her paintings. And so when I got to River House, at one point, Bill said, call whoever you want, just call them. So I called Louise and she said, I would love to come out and do a project with you. It was amazing. I was so humbled and I was just like so stunned that she would do that. And of course, then we just became really dear friends. And Lola, just working with Lola recently, she had the same kind of like freedom and just no fear at all about what we were going to do and what we would try. And she just like let me guide her, which I love because I feel like, okay, I know this. I know what we can do. So let me help you. Let's go on this path together. So Lola already, this was the joke that I invited her back for her second project. I said, you have won the award for the earliest return visit. And you won that at Tuesday afternoon of a week-long project at 3:00 in the afternoon, because it was just so fabulous already. And she made 26 big prints and monoprints in 1 week, and they're beautiful. And they're very similar to her painting process, which is she uses a lot of collage in her paintings, or even using a torn edge of a piece of paper as a stencil to paint off of it, so that it creates that really undulating, weird, ripped edge feeling. And so we essentially did the same exact thing. I told her she had homework, which she did earlier, and she just shredded a whole bunch of paper into these long, irregular shapes and coated all of them with acrylic medium on both sides, which essentially plasticizes them. And then we could do whatever we wanted. We could rub oil ink all over it. We could roll it. We could put watercolor on it. And then she would just kind of collage those together on the press, and boom, beautiful print. So it's so directly related to how she works in her painting studio. And she was a charming person. And that's a really big piece of it for me, is that we become friends.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's how we feel about our guests. Uh-huh. Like we fall in love with their work. And, Todd is very good about picking people he really attracts. He shows me some of the stuff that we're working on. He, sends me websites, and, we fall in love with their work. And then you sit down with them for a couple hours, you fall in love with the person, right? Yeah.
Feeling is mutual.
Yeah.
So my follow-up question to that is, did you know this from the get-go when you opened your own studio, that you only wanted to work with artists that their work resonates with you? Or was that something that you kind of had to learn? Like, I worked on a couple projects and I wasn't quite into it as much as I would have liked to been. And so now I think I'm just going to work with artists that I really want to work with.
Yes. The short answer is yes. Also, I'm too old to work with anybody I don't like, or we don't get along. And that's also kind of rare. I mean, I feel like I'm a fairly gregarious, open person. I certainly am an open person. I don't have any secrets, as you can tell. But I do have to say that I probably learned that, I would say, mostly at River House. There were two people there that shall go unnamed.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But they made beautiful, beautiful pieces, but they were extremely difficult to work with. And in one case, it was reverse chauvinism, which freaked me out. It was like, I don't even know how to say it. It was a woman, but she only respected my assistant. And my assistant was this wonderful guy at the time. I won't say his name either. He was great. You know who you are. And she literally wouldn't listen to me at all and would only listen to him. And it was weird. It was a constant battle. Made really beautiful prints. And the other person was a man, and it was kind of a similar thing, but he just had such a preconceived idea in his head of how this was going to happen without knowing anything about the process at all. And I'd say, well, we could do that, but that's going to be really, really difficult, that whole thing you want to do. We could do it this way, and it will achieve essentially the same exact thing. Having said all that, again, he persevered with some of his thoughts, and it made really beautiful prints, really, really complicated, beautiful things. They're not very successful, but no, just because they're minimalist mostly, but they are very, very beautiful, and I'm proud of them that I did them, but it was a challenge. So after those two things, I thought, okay, there really isn't any need. There's so many incredible artists out there, and I know a lot of them already. A lot of my artists, as I said, came with me from River House, but then through them, I've met many other artists. And so, there's a giant network of us out there in the world. And yeah.
And you want it to be enjoyable. It's like cooking, right? Like you can't be in a bad mood and cook,
right?
Or in the wrong mindset. So you want it from the get-go to be like this very positive, like upbeat, like, hey, this is an adventure we're on together, right?
Yeah. Or you're going to have a terrible meal and you won't like it.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah. And speaking of kitchens, the print shop downstairs, a really good print shop has to be organized kind of like a good kitchen. And so when I got this building, I really thought a lot about it, like where everything would be located. And, you have a clean area, which is near the press, and you don't ever have all kinds of ink and stuff over there because the paper has to stay really, really pristine before it gets printed. And then you have all the messy area in the back. And so, but it also has to be kind of tight because you don't need to walk all the way over there to get your blue ink or something. So it has to be very, very carefully planned out, just like a kitchen.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
You spoke to, how you love working with these artists that are just fearless. Is that something that sometimes you have to really negotiate with an artist? Like they kind of getting them over that hump of like, hey, we're going to explore this. And I know that there's that fear, but we'll figure it out. Like we'll make this happen.
You could work here. That's exactly what I do. And that is one of my roles is kind of coach, I call it, because even Lola said, oh my God, I was so nervous to come in here. And we had this like funny little, one of those happy accidents. Printmaking is a lot of happy accidents and some sad accidents, but the happy accident in this case was those pieces that she coated with the acrylic medium. I neglected to tell her that if she didn't stack them with wax paper or this stuff called glassine in between them, they would stick together. So she painted all of them. She's down in Denver. It's like 90,000 degrees in Denver. And then they were dry and she put them all on top of each other, hundreds of them, to bring them up here. They all stuck together. So then we had to literally yank them apart. They re-shredded with new open areas. And at first she was like, oh my God. And it was beautiful. It was exactly what we needed because those open, raw areas of paper that just shredded, they held the ink differently than the other areas. And so it gave us this automatic, like new nuance to these pieces that we would not have had if I had told her what to do properly. It is, as a coach, I have to like get them to a point where they're able to like just let themselves go. And I actually have an artist right now that I'm prepping to come later in the year. And she's very much in that fear right now. And part of it is, they're paying me to come up and work here. So they don't want to waste money. And I totally understand that. And it's almost impossible to talk them through it. They have to see it happen in action. They have to see it like, oh my God, that's fabulous, or that's beautiful, or oh, look at that. Or, so I just love it when it changes their perception of their own work. And I get very enthusiastic when we pull a print off. You guys didn't get to see that actually happening yesterday, but when we pull the print off, it's called the reveal. And it literally is like Christmas every single time it happens. Like sometimes I'm like, oh my God, and they get very excited with that too when that happens.
Yeah. So I think the key is for the artists and any artists that are listening that wants to come here and work with you is you got to trust the process. You got to trust the master printer. Right.
Yeah.
And once you allow yourself to trust, you're going to create some amazing work.
Yeah. And that goes for anyone. It's not just me. It's any of the master printers that are my colleagues. And that's what Ken was so good at. Ken Tyler, he did retire quite a few years ago. Now he paints, himself, which is wonderful. I'm so happy he's doing it in beautiful landscapes. When he was running his company, he was such a good mentor and a muse, and being able to inspire his artists to think even bigger than they were already thinking, and to do things that were crazy ass amazing, Yeah. And they loved that about him. And I did too. And I still do. And that's what I strive for. I strive to have them do the best thing that they can do here. And I want them to be really, really happy with what comes out of it and feel successful.
Yeah. I want to move to Steamboat just to hang out with you and watch the process.
Right?
My God. Yeah. Thank you. I'm having a blast. This is great.
Speak a little bit about the routine of how this plays out when an artist comes in and does a project with you, as far as, how long typically or roughly. And then, I know that you've talked with me a little bit about how you kind of ease them into it and then you kind of hit the ground running. So kind of describe that real quick, if you would.
Real quick?
Well,
I'm not going to real quick.
However you want to do it is fine.
I'm trying to do real quick. So basically, we start out with usually a studio visit. That's where I start to develop ideas, and that's at their studio, wherever that may be. Typically, a lot of my artists are in New York. Now I'm working more and more with people from Denver, some people from Steamboat. And then this is a new project I'm talking about. And then I'd start to develop ideas of how we'll do something. We usually try to get things pre-planned before they get here, specific sizes of prints that we're thinking of doing or images. And then once they get here, it's easing it in. The first day is usually a little slow. I usually try to show them various different techniques as quickly as I can that I think will relate to what they want to do. And then usually by the second day, we're going full blast. And that just means, in the shop downstairs, the artists have their own little area in the back with lots of counters and they're usually working on plates or working on watercolor vellums or oil-based vellums or something back there for their prints. And then we will all migrate up to the front of the studio where the presses are. And then we work on the press. Sometimes it's very simple. It might be just one plate going through and that's it. Or like in the case of Tycho Chandler, who is one of my favorite artists now. She's come here. She's about to come here in September for her 6th visit in like 3 years. So it's just amazing how productive she is and prolific. So she really has multiple, literally probably 100 different inked items and elements and vellums and stencils and everything that go onto her prints. And she'll just start composing it on the press as she goes. And then occasionally, what do you think, Sue? Here, there, there's the collaborative part of it, or I'll help her mix a color that she's really specifically trying to get and can't quite get it with the inks because they're different than paint. And then we print all day. We just kind of keep doing that over and over and over. When we print, our prints are wet. The paper is actually damp. So it has to be dried either under weight with blotters, or what we do, mostly because we can still see everything, is we staple everything to the wall. So my huge wall downstairs is covered with hundreds of thousands of staple holes. We actually calculated when we first opened, my first assistant, Julia, I loved her. We had ordered 50,000 staples, and it was a brand new studio. Everything was brand new. So 50,000 staples to start off. And we used those in 6 months. So in 1 year, it was 100,000 staples. So we're about 1 million staple studio now. That's what we call ourselves, 1 million staple studio. And my wall really shows it. There's 2 million staple holes because they each have 2 prongs. So there you go.
Yeah.
And so that's basically the process. Then after X number of days of doing this, that's essentially if we're just doing a monoprint process or project. With David Rowe, he also did, as I mentioned, he did numerous editions. And so I'm in that kind of a project. I'm in the etching room all day, every day. I'm constantly bringing out new plates, and my staff is proofing them and mixing inks. And then we show it to him, and he says yes or no, or we need to change this, or we need to change that, or can I file this? And so there's a lot of that modification and proofing in the process. And the proofs go from very big changes initially, and they get finer and finer and finer until you get to the point where the artist is satisfied with it. And that's the bonatire, the BAT that you're ready to print from. Then we sign everything, and then they go home and I collapse.
Can you reuse those plates that you're etching, or
No. Well, as I said before, they get canceled. We have sold occasionally. We've sold some copper. We cut it up, and then we sell it back to a recycler, but you get so little money for it. And I also kind of feel like I'm still, there's a whole concept of this donation of the archive to an institution. And that's a tradition. Right. Tyler Graphics Archive, as I mentioned, went to the Australian National Museum. It's also, he has 2 archives, and I do too. It's, the second one is at the Walker Museum in Minneapolis, and it's amazing. I mean, if you want to see Frank Stella prints, it's phenomenal. So they have essentially almost every single edition that was ever done at Tyler Graphics is there. Wow. And River House did half of their donation to the Block Museum in Chicago, and then the other half went to DU in Denver. So I'm considering a number of different places. For a long time, I had many, many interns, and they morphed into assistants after they were an intern. For some reason, they were feeding me these amazing young people from Colorado College in Colorado Springs. So I'm thinking of that as one of the possibilities, or the Denver Art Museum. Obviously, that makes a lot of sense since I'm in Colorado. But I also considered University of Michigan since I went there, but not sure yet where that's going to go.
Yeah.
So
I just, when you were saying, your staff works on this, and then they'll show the artist and they'll be like, well, not quite. I need to make these changes. Are you starting fresh again, or can you make the changes right there?
No, you make the changes right there. So it's fine tuning the plates themselves, fine tuning colors.
Okay.
And whether that's sanding something or adding more tone and making it darker or something or other, things like that.
Because I had this vision of all these changes of all these plates being stacked. No, this is different. So then you're making another plate. Yeah. And so this other one is stacked away, but no. Never to be used again,
Actually, this is a funny little story that there's times when, I feel like I've done this for thousands of years now, and I love it. Don't get me wrong. But, it's just amazing when I mess up, like a really big, stupid mess up. And so in 2012, I had Richard Bosman out here. He's actually a very consummate printmaker, has done it all his life. He's very well known for his prints along with his paintings. And he's been working for quite a few years on this whole series called Winter Survival. And they're very kind of odd, mysterious. There's always a backstory to these pieces. You really want to know what's happening. One of them is a man bundled up in a parka sitting in front of a fire in the middle of the snowfield, and nothing else around. And these are all based on things that he's researched and just, he's kind of fascinated with this concept of trying to survive in the winter. So he loves to come out to Steamboat because it is very, very wintry out here. Anyway, so So this one print that we were working on was this image of like straight on sideways of a deer, the side of a deer running, frantically running from something in a forest that was filled with snow. So there's the mirror image effect, right? So we were working on it. It had 6 plates all together in different browns and blues and grays to create this effect of this. And his work is kind of based in realism. It's not really super realistic, but you know exactly what you're looking at when you look at it. It's representational. And anyway, so the two of us, he's very, very long history in printmaking. We made one plate backwards. So one of the plates, the deer is going the wrong way and we couldn't use it, obviously. So we had to like start that whole plate over. So that's the only time that's ever happened. But we both looked at each other and was like, oh my God, I can't believe that we went through the whole process of like tracing on it and you drew into it and I etched it and it's totally backwards from the other 5 deer plates that go together. So yeah.
Crazy.
I've read in an article that you describe printmaking as Zen. Mm-hmm. Speak to that just a little bit.
That is not the creative part of it when I'm working with an artist or we're doing monoprints or whatever. That part I speak to is the editioning part. So when you're editioning, it's very meditative. It's very ritualistic. You have to be consistent. On the other hand, these are all hand-pulled prints by human beings. They're not done by a machine. So there's going to be some natural variance a little bit. Our goal is to make it the least amount possible. And one of my very first printmaking professors, Paul Stewart, said, as long as they are aesthetically similar or aesthetically at the same level. So in other words, if something is some area is slightly lighter or something, but it doesn't affect the overall image or it doesn't affect the concept that the artist has, then it's acceptable. The artist has the final say when they're signing the prints. So if I deliver a pile of prints to someone and they're very inconsistent, the artist could easily say, no, I don't like that one. I'm not signing it. So that's what is our motivation to make them as good as possible. So having said all that, it's just a very, very thought out methodical process. Like you kind of, once you get into a specific edition, you know, it's going to take us an hour and a half to wipe this plate and that plate and this plate. And you always do it exactly the same way. You put the color on this direction and you know, whatever it is, you have to keep it very, very methodical. And so it becomes very calming and you just kind of do it. Then you do it again and then you have lunch and then you do it again and then you go home. And it's very antithetical to the other part of it, which is full on thinking all the time, problem solving, being creative, you know, how can we make this better? What else can we do? What can we try? You know? And so it's a good balance actually.
So you find that flow at some point.
Yeah.
Doing it over and over and over again. And
it's very rewarding somehow. Like when you get that perfect rhythm of like trying to find, you know, especially if we're doing multiple people working on different plates, and then someone has to be the clean person that gets the paper ready to go onto the press before we start printing. Being on the press with a print like a Jason Kerouac print that had 12 plates. They're small, but they're still very time consuming to do. Just being on the press, it takes about 10 minutes just to run the plates through the press back and forth and lay them exactly in the right spot every time so they match up. And then each plate is very, very incomplete. That's another big issue. When someone's doing a multiple color edition print like that, they have to break it apart in their head. And this is where I have to help them. They have to create incomplete images, which is extremely difficult to do because then say there's 4 plates, red, green, blue, and yellow. Then they go together and they create a final complete image. A great example of that was with Kathy Bradford, who's probably my rock star artist. She's amazing. And just her career has just gone off the charts. fabulous artist. I lived next door to her in New York City in my loft for the first, 7 years I lived there. But she came out here and we worked on monoprints, on watercolor monoprints for about a week or a little bit more than a week, made a whole bunch of them. They're beautiful. A lot of like ships, very kind of naive painting style, very fresh and raw, childlike. And then she said, Sue, I want to make some prints. I said, you've been making prints. And she said, no, I want to make some edition prints. And so in 3 days' time, we ended up choosing 7 different monotypes that we liked as a jumping off point. And from those monotypes, I did little colored pencil sketches and visually, not digitally, color separated them for her and said, okay, this is going to be your green plate. Go ahead, you do this and do this with like carborundum aquatint. And then do this one. We're going to do an ink drawing. It's going to turn into a solar plate. And so I guided her through that process with these little like cartoons, essentially, of this image. So that the edition print very closely follows the monotype, but it's still a totally different thing because she's repainted the whole thing. And then we printed, so that was 7 times 4. So it was like 28 plates in 3 days that were either etched or exposed with a solar plate process, proofed in colors and printed 4 times just to get the BAT and an exhibition proof to show to galleries and such in 3 days. I mean, that was like a marathon, insane amount of work in 3 days. And it worked. They're beautiful. I'll show that portfolio too in the gallery when we're done. And it's called Steamboat Suite. And it has 2 pieces that are like the end pieces of this little dialogue about her ships. But the first 2, the first one and the last one are these figures that are in water or diving into water. And then in the center of the little suite is these 5 ship images, which is what she was doing at the time. And they're just these beautiful, gutsy, big shapes of these giant shipping vessels and little sparkling lights and the water and reflections. And they're lovely.
Wow.
So
that sounds amazing.
It does sound amazing. And I've read this, you talking about this as well, but definitely you're walking this line between the control of the process and what it involves and the chaos of what it all entails at any given time. Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's really fun, but sometimes a little stressful, right?
It is. Yeah, it can be. I think that the biggest stressor, and I'm sure this is true for probably most of my friends and colleagues, is money. There were times early on when I was like, okay, I'll move $24 out of that account into this account and $12 from that account. And then I could pay this one bill. I was like, it was ridiculous. Luckily right now, things are a little bit better on that end. And so it takes pressure off. And I hate that feeling of that pressure of how am I going to make my next payments? And that's the worst part by far. I wish that I had a Medici family behind me or something, right. Like Michelangelo had. That's just the way it is. And, you just keep going. During COVID, I swear, I lost about $30,000 of projected guaranteed income from workshops, classes, projects, shows in a period of 36 hours. Wow. On March 13th, Friday the 13th. And I was shell shocked. I was literally almost comatose by Monday, the 17th. And then it took me about a week. And then I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And so I wrote this compelling letter that I sent to all of my best clients and collectors and artists. And it was amazing. It was kind of like in It's a Wonderful Life at the end when all those people just start bringing money to George and he's the richest man in town. And I cry every time I watch it, every Christmas. And it was just like that. Like people just stepped up. They bought art they weren't planning to buy. They prepaid for workshops. A couple people just sent money and said, you know what? Just keep it. We believe in you. And including Louise back then even. So she's done that twice now. And it was just so phenomenal to feel that support behind me that I was like out on the end of the plank over the ocean and didn't know what I was going to do. And I was like, I'm going to lose everything in 1 month at this point. And because also when it hit in March, that's the beginning of when I get really busy. And so all of that was just about to start happening, and then it all canceled. Wow. And anyway, so I learned a lot about writing grants. I wrote a lot of grant applications, and we were very lucky, and just kind of, I just had to shift everything to working on stuff like that. And then also the best thing about COVID, that whole year for me, was realizing I wanted to keep my staff on. That was really important to me. And we did get a tiny, tiny PPP loan, the first one, but it helped. And then I said, what can I do? And as the only thing I could do is work on my own work, because I was here and they were going to be here once we got out of the first lockdown. And so that's what we did. We just came in and we just started. I just made a whole bunch of prints in response to what we were all going through in COVID, and we made it through, and it was thanks to all the generosity of these people that believe in us.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tenacity. Yeah. Making a plan.
Yeah.
Pivoting.
Yeah.
And
major pivoting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
yep.
and that's what, we've talked about this, that sometimes that's what the creative people can do best.
Yeah.
Is they can pivot and create something out of chaos, some order that will transition them into a different realm or whatever. And in this case, it was like, how do I financially make it to the other side?
Yeah.
And so just using your creativity of your own, it's like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. And the fact that you wrote a compelling letter and wasn't afraid to do that, and then people believed in you and stepped up. I mean, that's the first step.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I read it now and it's almost a little embarrassing, but like I said, I'm a very open person, and I just felt like I had to let these people that were all very close to me and dear to me know what was happening. And I couldn't keep it inside. I would die if I had done that. It was just so traumatic. I mean, besides just the pandemic itself, how scary that was. I think I had COVID because I went to this fundraiser down in Denver. It was before there was even a test. You could not even get tested in Steamboat. And I got so sick right after we locked down, about a week later. And I had been in this thing with a lot of people from Europe who had just flown from Europe. And I've never felt like that. I had this burning coal in the center of my chest. And it was awful. It was so horrible. So my doctor said, yeah, you probably have it, but you can't get tested yet. So just isolate. So literally right from the get-go, we went through a quarantine/isolation. And our house is designed so that I can live in the master suite at the end, which I did. And then we subsequently, we got our son from college, and then we subsequently went through probably 4 other quarantine situations where we all had to stay apart from each other. And they didn't get it. They never got it. Actually, Jason did have it a little bit when he was up in Bozeman, but he had a very mild case. But it was just so terrifying, and it's kind of feeling that way again, I have to say, with this trend that we're going in right now. But
we figured out how to negotiate some of those waters. What other things did you do? You kind of mentioned when, as this was going on this past year, that you were able to work virtually via FaceTime or whatever with Louise Fishman.
Yeah.
Did you do that a lot with artists, or what other things did you do that were incorporated that you never
pivoting,
had done before?
A lot of that, a lot of working long distance, via Skype, via Zoom, a lot of Zoom. Everybody did Zoom, and via just even phone calls. There are some artists that I work with here in Steamboat that would just, one person, Sarah Davison, would bring stuff over to me, and then we print it. She has a daughter she has to be super careful because of her daughter's condition. So she didn't even want to come in or anything. So sometimes I'd go out and grab things, and those were easy because they were dried watercolors and I could print them whenever I had time. then there was another artist, Connie Saddlemeyer, who's here in Steamboat, and she's been doing a whole series of things where she gave me essentially a photograph printed on clear acetate of this wall of Corten steel. That's the whole impetus for this entire giant project she's doing now. And that one photograph was tweaked in an app, a photo app, and kind of like shrunk and enlarged and did other things to it. And then I made a bunch of solar plates by myself without her. And then I would start proofing them, and then I would send her photos, and then she would call me and we would discuss it, and then we'd change colors, and the whole thing was done via telephone. And that was very, very unusual, but I realized at some point I could do that. I have another artist, Nancy Freese, who is a wonderful painter, landscape painter, and she teaches at RISD in Rhode Island. And she's working on a long distance etching project. So I sent her 3 12-inch square copper plates that were coated with hard ground. And then she scribes through them with a dry point needle to open up the copper with little tiny, tiny, delicate lines, and millions of them on each plate. And they're just essentially these drawings of these forests and trees, and it's going to be a long 36-inch long triptych when it's done. But so she did that, then she sent them back, and then we etched them, then I sent them back to her so she can work on them again after I proofed them. So things like that, like just trying to figure out ways to keep going and keep doing it long distance. We did a presentation. Every year we're part of this huge auction, which is in Boston for Mass Art, the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And they did a virtual kind of studio visit this year with myself and Wingate Studio, which is in New Hampshire. Peter Pettengill, a fabulous, fabulous human. Unfortunately, I developed severe vertigo right before this took place. And it was just after I got the vaccine. And I my own lovely medical degree says I feel like I got it from the vaccine, but I'm not sure about that. Anyway, so Teddy, my assistant, ended up doing this, and we kind of planned the whole thing and walked through it, but he essentially gave them a virtual tour of the studio via Zoom, and then talked quite a lot about the 7 prints that were included in this auction for Mass Art. And it was fabulous. He did a great job. I think that whole part of it, that was kind of interesting how everybody figured this out pretty quickly. Like, how can we do this? How can we still be a part of something? And like, even just talking to you guys right now, it's great to be able to look at you in person, even though you guys can't see us, but, it's just so nice to be able to be in person and react in person and not have that weird half a second lag time that Zoom has, or whatever it is. So I just think I think as humans, that's our best quality, is that we can adapt and that we can change and pivot.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we always prefer to do it in person. So we're glad that we were able to do that here.
Do you sit down with these artists and then figure out how to price this work that you've made, or how does that work? Is there some kind of pricing structure that you have, or is it based on the process and time? How does that all work?
Kind of a little bit of everything that you just said. There is sort of a kind of basic structure. If you look at our website and kind of start looking at different pieces, and there's sort of certain size ranges that kind of fall into certain parameters. Having said that, some artists, based on their career and their resume, they are, very, very accomplished, very well known, their work sells for a lot of money in their galleries. And so their pieces are usually priced higher than that normal kind of range. The same can be true of someone who's an emerging artist, that if they're just starting out, that their pieces will be priced lower because there isn't that resume behind them yet. I definitely always plan on counting on my artists to keep going and grow, like Sari. Sari's the perfect example of someone who just really jumped in with both feet and just kept working and working and working. And now she's very, very successful and just doing a really phenomenal job with her prints. So it's a little bit of all of that. It's kind of, what I feel the market can bear. And it's usually kind of negotiated between myself and the artist, but typically I suggest something and then they usually say fine, or sometimes maybe a little bit less or a little more, something like that. So
you spoke to these fine print fairs that you go to. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's a great way to get these artists in front of other people and sell art. Do you sell a lot of art via the internet, via your online presence, via your website?
More than ever now. The other thing that we did, the other big pivot with COVID, is in the very beginning when we literally were locked down and we didn't even come here. I had an intern who was living here at the time, Izzy and Teddy and Max and I, in our remote locations apart from each other, worked on completely rebuilding our website. We totally changed it, complete brand new thing. And the old website was fine, but it was just kind of archaic and, it wasn't user friendly. It was like too many clicks and you kind of went into something and you had to come back out of it. It was kind of silly. So I worked with a woman down in Denver who is a web designer. She did all of the main design and fabrication of the pages and how it was functioning and all that. But then we had to upload hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces and back up information and material and resumes and compiling all this stuff. So we did all of that.
Does social media even play into the equation at all?
I think it does. I think more so, now than before, also like with the website. My main assistant now, Teddy, is wonderful. And he manages our Instagram account and all of our social media. We kind of go up and down with being good with it. We'll have like a month where we just kind of forget everything because we're so busy with everything else. And I realize consistency is important with that. But it does seem like there are more people in the art business per se, especially consultants, that only deal now with Instagram, for instance. They don't look at anything else. They don't even do email anymore. It's like they only find things on Instagram and they only respond to that. So we're trying to juggle that and kind of keep track of these different people, different entities, and how's the best way to communicate with that particular person. This person might only like text. This person only does email and JPEGs, so it's like kind of keeping on top of all of that has been challenging, but I think we're doing okay with it. Obviously that's the big question. It's like, if I could figure out ways to reach more people and show them the beautiful prints that we do, it would all be better.
Right.
So look at the website, people.
It's always trying to figure out the special sauce, right? Like,
yeah.
And with so many modes of communication, like you mentioned,
yeah,
it's difficult.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you have a group of people that are collectors that you can always reach out to that collect certain artists, or if you have somebody new, I assume that you introduce them to these collectors.
Right. Or they will bring their collectors to us. So, they have X amount of people that just love their work. And so they will introduce us, and then we can start sending them images and things like that. That seems to be waning a little bit. And it's interesting because the corporate collecting had been very, very strong for a long time. And then like probably about 10 years ago, right when I opened, that started to kind of fall apart. And corporate collections were not adding to their collections nearly as much as they had been. And we're talking like, and I think I can say all these, Fidelity, Bank of America, Chase, big collections like that. Hallmark Cards in Kansas City has an enormous, fabulous print collection from many, many, many different print studios. The U.S. State Department is one of my biggest clients, and they have this fabulous program, which is called the Art Bank program. And the idea is that they collect and preserve works on paper by American artists. You have to be an American citizen. And most of my artists are, not everyone. But then these pieces, as soon as they collect them, they frame them, and then they are essentially put into this giant database. And so they furnish artwork to offices in 20 different buildings in Washington, D.C. So whenever there's a changeover of an administration, they can acquire new pieces. Number one, they also loan out new pieces. The old staff will return everything, and then the new staff comes in and they say, we like landscapes, or we like flowers, or we like whatever it is. And then the head curator will direct them to certain pieces. Then he'll actually pull the pieces out. They can choose what they want, and then it's sent over and installed. And so it's such a fabulous concept that they're preserving history and collecting this amazing collection for posterity. And then it's actually still being seen by people. It's wonderful. So this curator, I'm not going to name him, but he's an incredibly wonderful, generous man. And he gave me a personal tour the last time I was in DC, which was 2019, because it was always in April when I went there for the show. And so I had a free morning before my flight back. And he said, do you want to come see it? And I was like, yes, of course. So getting into the building was about 45 minutes of background checks, full body checks. I mean, it was crazy. And then the whole time I was there with him, I had a little tag that said, must be accompanied, and so I couldn't go off on my own anywhere. But he took me down to the art bank, which is this vault in the basement. And it was fabulous. And he had pulled out all of these Oehme Graphics pieces that were on the walls. And they own, I think now, 4 of my pieces. The most recent one was one of the great big, long horizontal pieces that I've done. And that one went into like the Secretary of Finance's office or something. It's really cool. It's a really cool thing. So
that is cool.
Yeah.
I read that, and I don't know if this is still a thing, but that your assistants kind of keep a running tab of conversation that goes on in the studio. And sometimes that becomes titles for some of the work that you do.
Yeah. So I don't know if you saw this, but down in the studio, pinned up on the wall is this list of titles. And so these are titles for future pieces. And they're always just weird little snippets of conversation they're just weird. They're funny. They're quirky. They don't really go together, or, something or other. So I choose from that. We just have this constant running list of these things. And it's always, we have great conversations. I love my staff. They keep me young. They're the ones that keep me young. So, and they're all wonderful. They work really, really hard. They're all talented artists in their own right. They have shows often, and I try to support them as much as I can. I keep buying art from them. I really don't need any more art. I have a lot of art, but I like to support them. So, their work is beautiful too. The one in your room right there is by Izzy Vanden Heuvel. And as soon as I saw that piece, I had to buy it immediately. And that was done. So the piece I'm talking about is a beautiful 3-dimensional print called Resting Place. And it is made up of hundreds of little tiny butterflies that were printed from a linoleum block in a gradating medium gray out to a pale gray at the edge in a target, like in a circle. So it's very, very Zen and meditative piece. It's very simple in concept. It's beautiful. It's just sort of like they almost flutter inside the frame. And I just had to get it. So, and to circle back to what I was just saying, the U.S. State Department just commissioned her to do a second version of that very same piece, which she's working on right now.
That's amazing.
And,
wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
And she's 24 years old or something. Wow. It's such a huge thing for her. So, and I'm very, very excited for her about that.
Yeah. I want to give a shout out to Teddy. Uh-huh. He met us yesterday, and what a wonderful young man. And
yeah.
Yep. So it was really nice to meet him and his dog,
Louis. His Spanish dog, Louis.
And Louis, who was just a joy.
Yeah. Yeah, Teddy Benson is my main assistant now, and he's a kid who came from CC, as I talked about earlier. He got his master's in Madison, which is a very, very good printmaking school. And then he lived in Spain for a year, and he was teaching art and teaching English. And he met his little dog Louis over in Spain and brought him back to Steamboat. So
that was a great story you shared.
Yeah.
So Louis special. So shout out to Louis.
Yeah. There you go, Louis. Now you're famous, even more so.
Last but not least, anything that you want to talk about that you have coming up between now and the end of the year, or even in the 2022 that we didn't either discuss or that you're excited about?
Well, in just probably 2 hours, Deborah Zlotsky's going to be walking through the door. So that's the first thing right there. I'm very, very excited about working with her. And I know that will be an ongoing, continuing relationship for hopefully years and years. I'm just really excited to hopefully get back in person and be able to show people all the prints that we do. I have a show, my next show at Space is lined up, but that's luckily not for 2 years because I have a lot of work to do before that to get ready for it. So other than that, teaching in France next summer and just kind of keep on doing what I'm doing.
Thinking about the artists you've worked with and thinking about your own art, what's it mean to be bold as an artist?
Wow, you guys really throw some whoppers at me. I think that is different for everybody. I mean, I would certainly say that Louise Fishman is bold, but it's bold in a sense of strength and determination and intent. Very deep intent in her work. Other people can be bold for other things. They could be bold with color, or And I one thing I didn't really say, I feel like with my own work, one of the things that started the process of where I am now is thinking about the way the artists, work with me and how they make their decisions, how they problem solve, how they look at something and how they fix it or how they solve whatever the issue is. This is getting really philosophical now, but it's kind of like based on a lot of just very basic art school formal aesthetic devices and color and shape and balance and composition, and whether it's realistic or abstract, it doesn't really matter. And I definitely have assimilated a lot of those things. There's this very unfamous Woody Allen movie called Zelig, and you probably haven't heard of it. Nobody has. It's very funny. He plays this man who has a psychiatric condition where he physically changes his appearance to become more like the people he's around. So, and Mia Farrow, God bless her soul, plays his psychiatrist, and he keeps getting lost in the world, and they find him, and he looks like he has gone and he's living in a Chinese laundry, and he's turned himself into an overweight Chinese laundress woman, things like that. But I always think about that because first of all, I thought that movie was hysterically funny, but I feel like I have to morph myself into, I think like they think. Because I really am sort of their clone. I'm this clone of this artist, and I'm trying as best I can to just think the way they think and help them to make the decisions they need to do to complete their project. Anyway, and that has kind of seeped into my own work. So it's like there's little bits and pieces I've collected from everybody that I use either physically, literally, as in pieces of little old plates that were cut up and tossed away, or even just, this color against this color, or this shape of this thing or something or other, things like that. So I feel like I've kind of assimilated a lot of those different pieces into my own being. They're all part of me. It's really, really a cool concept.
Yeah, that was beautifully put.
Thank you.
I love that. And I look at your art. It's beautiful and it's bold. And I love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if you're listening to this podcast, I think you have a pretty good sense of what happens at Oehme Graphics, and definitely check out Sue's work. It's phenomenal. And again, the websites, if you're an artist interested in printmaking, it's oehmegraphics.com. And if you want to check out her Sue's brilliant work, go to sueoehme.com. Sue, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys. It was so much fun. I mean, it was just great. I feel like I was on Terry Gross.
And we'll take that.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate your generosity putting us up here in Steamboat in your beautiful place. And thank you for your generosity of time today.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's been wonderful.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
For the Tenant Podcast, I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.